So here we are for a workshop on 5G wireless telecommunications, and we have a whole line of folks here on the desk that I think I'm going to hand this off to right away. Tom?
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Sears and members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Tom Lai. I'm with the Community Development Agency, and by way of introduction, the gentleman to my left is Jeremy Tajarian. He's our current planning manager. You will hear a presentation by Manny Barakat, our senior planner, who's overseeing our wireless project here. Following Manny's presentation, Brian Case from County Council's office will provide your board with an update on the latest in the litigation front.
Great.
So I thought I might kick it off by explaining that staff has been working with a board subcommittee comprised of Supervisors Connolly and Rodoni since late last year as we observed kind of the various regulatory responses that's been taken by cities and counties following the federal communications issuance of a couple of orders last year. We're scheduling this workshop so that we can brief your board on what we found and hopefully get some direction from your board on what changes will be necessary as we revisit the county's regulatory framework, which is encapsulated in our telecommunications facilities policy plan and in our zoning regulations so that we have the best tools available to provide the best way to regulate the next generation of small wireless facilities. So with that, I will hand off the mic to Manny, who will give you a quick overview about the topic, and then follow up by Brian Case, and then we can take questions afterwards.
Great.
Thank you.
Tom. Good evening.
Good. Thank you, Tom. Good evening. My name is Manny Barakat. I've been working with Tom and Jeremy on this topic on the application of 5G. This workshop has been scheduled to get a direction from the board on how to respond to the recent FCC order related to small cell wireless facilities, also known as 5G. As you know, Marin County has an adopted policy and permitting process to regulate wireless facilities. The county's plan includes policies related to the most desired locations for wireless facilities, design standards, and permitting process. Industrial and commercial areas are the most desired locations, while open space and residential areas are the least desirable places. The plan allows the county to require a use permit and a design review process, and if applicable, a coastal permit. 5G. 5G, or the fifth generation, G stands for generation, is the next generation of the wireless facilities. According to industry experts or proponents, the 5G would offer faster data download, data transmission, and allow increased facility and allow greater application of the proposed technology. Deployment of the 5G began in late fall, at first in Sacramento, followed by San Jose, San Francisco, and a few other Bay Area cities. Unlike the 4G or the 3G or the previous generations, the 5G technology works differently. It relies on a series of facilities installed close to each other, closer to the user, whereas the previous generations were in a tower and blasted out, covering bigger spaces. As a result, more facilities will be required to provide coverage and closer to the user. The user includes homes, residences, businesses. 5G facilities are typically attached to traffic lights, street lights, sides of a building, utility poles, and so forth. Here is an example from San Francisco that was installed earlier this year. On the other hand, we've received so many complaints and concerns about health issues associated with electromagnetic field exposure, or also RFR, which is radio frequency radiation. In addition, because of the way the facilities will be installed close to each other in residential areas, people are concerned on how they may look or the appearance of those facilities. Although, as outlined in the staff report, although RFR and EMF emissions are not administered locally, the county does require applicants for each proposed facilities to demonstrate that a proposed facility complies with the FCC standards for maximum permissible exposures. As Tom mentioned, the FCC rule issued a ruling that essentially limits local control on design review, allows 5G facilities to be permitted in all areas, including residential neighborhoods. It imposes new time frames, or also known as shot clocks, for processing applications. And it also caps how much a local jurisdiction may charge. In terms of design guidelines, in order for the county to apply design guidelines for 5G or small cell wireless facilities, those design guidelines need to be reasonable and that they're technically feasible and objective. They also need to be no more burdensome than applied to similar infrastructure. And finally, they need to be published in advance and in effect at the time an application is submitted to the county. One of the FCC's rule or mandates is that 5G facilities need to be permitted in all districts, including residential areas. Outright prohibition of small cell wireless facilities or 5Gs in residential areas could be in violation of the FCC ruling. Time frames or shot clocks are also a new concept to introduce. New shot clocks have been introduced in both this FCC ruling. For attachment to an existing facility, the county has only 60 days to take an action, whether it's to approve or deny the application. And for a new small cell 5G small cell or wireless facility, it has 90 days to take an action, whether it's approval or denial. These shot clocks include all aspects of the permitting process, including public hearings, building permits, lease negotiation, and so forth. The FCC ruling also limits permitting fees as well as annual lease or fees to access right-of-ways of public utilities. Throughout this process, we've taken multiple steps to engage the public. These actions included creation of a website dedicated for 5G or small cell wireless facilities. We circulated a brief survey to residents. We reached out to interested parties as well as stakeholders. A notice of this workshop was also published as required by law. In terms of survey results, over 200 people participated in the process. Their results show that people who are willing to support change to the existing regulations if we would allow increased or retain the same level of service. Also, a majority of the survey respondents expressed concerns related to health effects of wireless facilities or the technology itself. In terms of distribution, of the 200 plus respondents, 54% live in town or cities within Marin County, while 46 are residents of unincorporated areas. I have you have a complete set of results of the survey, but I've only covered briefly. And then in conclusion, tonight we recommend the board to conduct a workshop, and at the conclusion of the workshop, provide staff with direction as how to respond to the FCC regulations. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Any questions from the board on this part of the presentation? I actually do have a couple of questions, and the first one is on the slide. It's not numbered, but it's titled FCC Third Order Aesthetics. Great, and it says that design guidelines should be no more burdensome, similar to those applied to other types of similar infrastructure deployments. Can you explain what similar infrastructure deployments may mean? Brian, perhaps you can
Well,
assist.
it's a good question, and that's the exact language used in the FCC order, and that's about as much insight as we can provide as the exact language that the FCC has provided, because it's never been interpreted by a court.
Okay, so we don't know. And then on the next slide, FCC Third Order, it says, applies to all districts, an outright prohibition may not be permitted. So that doesn't mean that it is absolutely barred, correct?
Correct. The standard articulated in the FCC order, and perhaps Manny can further comment on this, is the effective prohibition test.
The effective prohibition test, could you explain that?
Yeah, so it's complicated, and there are many paragraphs in the FCC order explaining this, but the basic idea is that a local jurisdiction can't effectively prohibit coverage in any area. Now, effective prohibition is defined in a very industry-favorable manner in the FCC order, but ultimately, again, like the term similar infrastructure, it's going to be a term that's probably going to have to be interpreted in courts if the order is upheld in the courts, despite the many jurisdictions who have challenged it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian.
I've got a quick follow-up
Supervisor
on
Connolly?
that. Thank you, Brian. So we are seeing other jurisdictions take up this issue and after careful thought coming up with solutions like buffers around residential zones, whether it be 500 feet, I think in the case of San Rafael, 1,500 feet in the case of Fairfax. So how do you address that in terms of, is that an option available? It seems to be. And how does that square with what we're talking about?
Is that directed to me?
Sure. Or
Yeah.
anyone.
I could refer to the staff report. We talk a little bit about the issue that you're speaking to, and that's essentially litigation exposure in the context of our current ordinance. In light of the FCC order being adopted, is it exposed to challenge by the industry if an application was filed? And I think the types of ordinances you're addressing would improve the defensibility of any ordinance if it's made to be more objective, more compliant with the FCC order. Those types of changes are certainly changes that can be made that would help if we ever were in a situation defending against a challenge.
So your view is, so essentially those do preclude residential siting. They create a buffer. You believe that is defensible?
Well, every ordinance is a little bit different, and again, we don't even really know what the test in our circuit is going to be to determine whether a local regulation is lawful. We're currently challenged the FCC order, but there is certainly language in the order that is concerning about any regulation that bans in a certain region that gets into the question of, is it an effective prohibition? For example, a ban in a residential area or very large spacing in a residential area. That certainly calls into question the FCC's, or calls into question compliance with the FCC's effective prohibition test.
But it sounds like there could be a basis to do it that would not necessarily be adverse to the law.
Correct. There are a lot of gray areas despite the FCC's order in terms of what does it mean to comply with the order. And I think many of the local jurisdictions in Marin and elsewhere have tried to tackle that question of how can we pass reasonable, objective local regulations that comply with the order, and you've named a few.
Katie, did you have
Yeah,
a question?
I
Yeah,
do.
Supervisor Rice.
A couple sort of basic questions. Manny, when you were describing just the infrastructure or the, you were talking about 5G users, and you left out, I think you left out motorists.
When I use the term users, I'm referring to everyone, including motorists, including firefighters, including
Okay, so, no, but mobile, so folks in cars also would be on streets.
on streets. Correct.
Okay, and then my other question is, if the 5G antennas are typically installed on existing traffic lights antennas, you say also on sides of buildings, existing structures, it says also new low-rise poles, et cetera. When these, the telecom cos are installing new poles, if that's what's required for that location, they would either have to own the property or have an easement?
Or correct, they would need an authorization from the underlying property owner, whether it's county or private. If it's privately held, from fee title holder. Correct.
Okay, and then, Tom, I don't know, I maybe missed the sequence of what comes next in the presentation, but for me, it would be really helpful if you could answer now or maybe in the next part of the presentation to characterize sort of the objective and what our current policy has been able to achieve in terms of historically looking backwards, maintain our local control around the technology that's been cut forth, and how does the new FCC ruling change our ability to actually implement those objectives?
Sure, maybe I will answer that right now. Set the context, and I'll hand it off to Brian Case on the status of the litigation. So the county updated the telecommunications facilities policy plan around the time, I think, between the 3G and 4G deployment. And what we were able to do is tighten up our policies around basically the concept of prudent avoidance by having preferential locations for these antenna facilities, with the top preference being industrial sites, commercial sites, public sites, with residential sites being the lowest preference. The other tool that we've used to make sure that these facilities do address community character and aesthetics is emphasize stealth and co-locating of facilities. Some of these turned out okay. These are the artificial trees you see on the side of the freeways. Some have been integrated into architectural elements of buildings, such as steeple for churches or different elements that screen it. The goal is to make it stealth, make it less visible so that we don't create a harsh impact to the visual environment. Along with that, we require carriers to provide alternatives analysis, and that is something we want to discuss with the board at the workshop later, showing why the facility cannot be sited on one of the higher preference sites. So for instance, if you are proposing a new facility in a residential area, we would say, well, are there other sites that rank better under our policy plan, meaning if you have commercial sites, industrial sites, or ag sites nearby, and why can't you meet your coverage objectives by moving this facility to one of those higher preference sites? And some of these projects actually have been appealed to your Board of Supervisors, and the alternatives analysis is a very effective tool. Now, we do have to kind of filter that tool now through the new FCC order, and that's the part. There's a legal component to it and certainly a practical component we can discuss later on. So we have identified the need to revisit our basic framework for regulating the next generation of small wireless facilities. We think we have a good foundation and bones, and there does need to be amendments we need to make in order to comply with the FCC order. And I think we'll get into kind of how far we can push later on after we've heard public testimony and maybe be able to respond to some of the suggestions that we may hear from members of the audience. Having said that, I do want to just remind everybody, today is a workshop. The board's not making any final decision. The county has jurisdiction only over the unincorporated areas, so we don't have jurisdiction over cities and towns. And forgot the third point. Maybe they'll come back to me later. So we've been using, and finally, to recap kind of the tool, new technologies and new carriers are subject to the master plan requirements so that we can see the entire network of planned facilities. And individual facilities that are new currently require a use permit and design review. If a carrier is co-locating with an existing antenna, that requires design review. So that's basically the gamut of discretionary permits that we have at our disposal to address primarily community compatibility issues. As your board knows, we can't use the presence of potential health effects as the sole decision to deny a facility if that facility meets federal standards. Now, having said this, we also know there's many studies out there, including a recommendation from the World Health Organization that electromagnetic radiation frequency may be a carcinogen to human beings. So certainly being careful is good, but we also have to make sure that
All right,
we're within the
everybody.
bounds of what is legal under federal law. So that is the challenge we have before us.
And Tom, just for clarification, those three forms of flexibility and discretion that you described are not changed by the new FCC guidelines, correct? So they would still be available, or is that something that potentially would need to be revised depending on what the guidance is or input is about legality?
We'd like your board's input on the degree that we may need to revise those tools, because the fundamental difference between a discretionary permit and a ministerial permit is the ministerial permit only requires that we verify the project for conformance with objective, clear standards. Doesn't give us that discretion to evaluate whether it's compatible, whether the color is the appropriate tone, whether there's other places we can cite this. So we do have to address that part of the order. But before we get too far ahead, I do want to let the board know, Brian Case here wants to update your board on the litigation that your board asked the county to participate in, and maybe an update on that before we
Super.
complete this segment and ask for the public to provide their input.
You bet. Thank you,
Thank you.
Tom. Brian,
Good evening, Madam President.
good evening.
So your board promptly took action last fall upon issuance of the FCC order to challenge it, as you'll recall. Your board authorized the County of Marin to join in the appeal of City of Eugene, Oregon versus the United States. The FCC order was adopted and became a binding federal regulation on October 15th, 2018. So, of course, under the Supremacy Clause, lawfully adopted federal regulation can preempt local regulations. And this particular FCC regulation does usurp local authority, and that's precisely what you authorize us to challenge in this action. The two basic parts of the FCC order, which have been discussed already, are the new shot clocks that really restrict the amount of time that a local jurisdiction has to review an application, and also the clawing back of local authority to regulate aesthetic regulations by the FCC and making rules that are very industry favorable at the federal level that the local jurisdictions can't regulate on it regarding aesthetics. So those are the key issues in the appeal, and this is an appeal directly at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals at this juncture. It's now been transferred to the Ninth Circuit, which is a positive development because the Ninth Circuit has, circuits follow the law of the circuit, and there's already favorable Ninth Circuit law on this point that preserves local regulatory authority. So that's a good development in the litigation in terms of preserving local control. The key issues in the appeal are, one, statutory arguments that the FCC's order improperly reinterprets the INRI California Payphone Association standard by disregarding the actual prohibition test, and reads the right-of-way compensation saving clause in 47 U.S. Code Section 253C totally out of existence. So those are statutory arguments that we're challenging. Two, we're making constitutional arguments that the order constitutes commandeering of local government and violates the 10th Amendment in that regard, and constitutes an unlawful taking of government property under the 5th Amendment. Third, we are arguing that the new shot clocks are unreasonable and that the science and technology of 5G facilities was not properly studied or understood, making the order an example of arbitrary and capricious rulemaking. What your board can expect will be a briefing that will most likely take place and complete this summer, and then oral arguments in the fall or winter of this year. The decision would probably be made in early 2020.
Great, thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian Case? The board? All right, Tom, I'll bring it back to you.
So my recommendation for the format of the workshop is, I don't have anything else to add except to enforce your limits on the amount of time for organizations, including carriers and individuals, and no ceding of time to the speaker. So that would be my recommendation to the president and the rest of the board, in the interest of moving through so that we can get to the discussion with the board at the end of the workshop.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
If I may, through the president, I forgot one matter in the update about the litigation. The city and county of San Francisco, the town of Corte Madera, and the county of Contra Costa have joined in our coalition, and other Bay Area or neighboring jurisdictions who have joined other coalitions include Piedmont, San Jose, town of Hillsborough, Emeryville, San Bruno, town of Fairfax, city of Monterey, and Burlingame.
Great, thank you, Brian. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go to the public, but first I want to address the issue of clapping and woo-wooing. We all love to feel supported. It can also be incredibly distracting. So I'm going to ask everyone in the audience, when the speaker says something that you thought was terrific and you agree with, raise your hand in lieu of clapping. And for those who are younger, you can snap your fingers. However, your expressive mode that's quiet, you can pick what it is. But I would ask that there's no clapping or woo-wooing or other sort of verbal expressions. It'll help us be able to hear speakers better. So could I see a show of hands of how many people would like to speak? All right, and this is why we want to be as efficient as we can. I'm going to stick with our usual 3 minutes for everyone, and I would ask that sometimes people come in and they want to cede part of their time to someone else to give that person more time. We're not going to do that tonight. So everybody individually gets 3 minutes. I enforce the clock. So you can get a lot said in 3 minutes, and please, I appreciate it if you're mindful. And if people who have spoken before you, if you're essentially going to say the same thing, you get extra credit for speaking less than 3 minutes. And I think Tom Lai wants to add on something.
Yes, we received a request from an individual wishing to speak earlier on because of a scheduling conflict.
Uh-huh.
So if that individual can identify himself, that way we'll be able to take his testimony.
Absolutely.
Early on.
I saw that hand raised. I'm going to invite that person to come right up to the front of the line.
And then we also have members of the telecommunications companies here. It might be my recommendation to have those kind of go first.
Mm-hmm.
Same subject to the same three.
Okay, you're
Subject to the
violating the
same
rules already.
3 minutes, so that they don't have the ability to come in later to speak again. I mean,
Excuse me?
the carriers. So my recommendation is for the carriers to speak earlier on rather than later, because that way they don't have the last word, so to speak. This allows
I think, I don't want to get too crazy about it. I'm going to give the gentleman who's got a shortage of time the opportunity to speak first so we can accommodate your schedule. How many representatives from carriers are there here tonight? If you could identify yourselves. We have 2 people. You're welcome to speak after this gentleman, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the public. All right, so remember, none of that oral wah wah woo woo, no wah wah wah. You're just going to go like this. I really appreciate everybody working with us on this, and please come forward. Thank you. Good evening. And state your name, everyone.
My name is William Now.
Thank you.
I have a medical implantable medical device in my heart, and it's made out of titanium metal. And I recently discovered the hard way that wireless radiation will cause the metal to resonate, and it will magnify the radio waves in my body. And this is how I learned it. I recently 4 months ago, I accepted my ideal job and was working in a small office on site, and discovered that my blood pressure had climbed 30 points. And I would come home at night exhausted. So I started doing some research, and I discovered numerous studies that indicate that wireless radiation has a direct effect on blood pressure and other cardiac phenomena. And another interesting thing that I discovered through PubMed, internationally acclaimed literature, was that wireless radiation can magnify medical devices can magnify that radiation beyond the FCC standards, significantly beyond the standards. So my question to the telecommunication industry is, what studies have you done? What studies have you conducted regarding medical implantable devices?
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes. And I do have a little bit of research I can share with the board.
Super. Thank you very much. If I could now ask the representatives from the industry, I think there are 2 gentlemen who raised their hands. I'll give you an opportunity to speak now, and then we'll come back with the public.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Viegas, and I work for Verizon Wireless. At Verizon Wireless, I'm part of the Community Development Department, where we focus on building relationships with the communities that we serve. So I'm here today to talk to you a bit about small cells and 5G, and I prepared a presentation, but in an effort to keep it to the 3 minutes, I'll skip over some of the slides that we've already discussed. So the first reason why Verizon is interested in expanding their network in Marin County. Statistics show that in 2017, the average wireless user consumed 7.1 gigabytes of data per month. Projections show that by 2023, data consumption will increase to 48 gigabytes per month per average user. That's 6 to 7 times greater than what we consumed in 2017. In addition, 76% of 911 calls are made on mobile devices, and in order to ensure that these calls are made successfully, we have to ensure that the network is operating at its full potential. And we can skip to the next slide. So a wireless network is very much like a highway system, so as more and more users utilize the existing network, it becomes bogged down, and as a result, we see that text messages are delayed, data is slowed down, and we're unable to make phone calls. For this reason, we need to increase capacity and tap into the 5G spectrum, which will allow us to continue to utilize the network as we've become accustomed to. And we could skip this slide because we've already discussed the design here. So here, or we could go back one, please. So here we have examples of deployments that Verizon has deployed. The photo on the left is a 5G design that we deployed in the city of Sacramento, and the photo on the right is a 4G design that we deployed in the city of San Francisco. The primary difference between the two of these is that with the 5G design, the antenna as well as the radio are incorporated into a single unit, as opposed to the 4G design where they're separated out. Next slide. This is very similar. These are wood pole designs that are similar to the streetlight designs that were showed previously. And as you can see, the photo on the left, on the previous, yeah, there we go. The photo on the left, that's a 5G design that was deployed in the city of Sacramento, and the photo on the right is a 4G design that was deployed in the city of Santa Rosa.
You have 26 seconds, so be mindful of the time.
Okay, so public benefits. So these are the reasons why we're doing this. So one of the benefits that we'll be able to see with 5G is collision avoidance, and this is where vehicle manufacturers will embed a smart chip in vehicles. And the smart chips will allow the vehicles to communicate with one another over a 5G network. So if a vehicle detects a road hazard, then that vehicle will immediately begin to transmit that information to other vehicles in order to avoid a collision.
And your time is up. Can you wrap up?
Yes, of course. So one last thing. I would like to request that the Board of Supervisors direct staff to work with the industry in order to draft an ordinance that is in line with the FCC order. And then I would personally like to invite all of you to attend or to visit the Verizon Innovation Center in the city of San Francisco. And I would be willing to set that up so that you guys could learn about new emerging technologies that you guys would be able to deploy in Marin County in order to make Marin County a smarter city.
Thank you.
Or county, I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. No. Did I have another industry rep who wanted to speak? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Matt Yurgovich. I'm here for AT&T Mobility. So small cells, as you've heard, are generally miniature, low-powered wireless facilities. The advantage of them is that they are able to use existing, usually public right-of-way infrastructure rather than the towers with which folks may or may not be familiar. So the idea is that they're, by their very nature, less visually intrusive, less intrusive to the environment and to the communities. The public right-of-way is an area where telephone and telegraph has been used for about 150 years. And so I think that the industry has come full circle, and here we are going back into the public right-of-way where utilities have been established for so long. Why do we need them? Well, the CDC has estimated that since 2007, there's been a 470,000% increase in wireless usage. So most people have purchased smartphones and are increasingly relying on wireless devices for their home, residential, and business uses. The FCC recognizes the need to address this demand, and so they implemented the order to reduce barriers to entry for the wireless industry. We're here to work with the county to make sure that the county implements fair rules and so that these wireless facilities can be tactfully deployed. The county has until April 15th to establish its aesthetic guidelines. And we're here until that time or thereafter to work with the county and work with the community to respect community concerns and the county's needs. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right. Good evening.
You ready for public?
I am ready.
All right. I'm a mere civilian. Alex Statner, resident of Lucas Valley. Thank you for taking the time this evening to hear our comments. I just find that we've been silenced from the ability to consider health effects for this. Really wrong. And for the fellow from Verizon to close his comments with some speculative large number of lives saved by some theoretical approach to collision avoidance is just mind-boggling that we can't then say, well, where's the data? There, a fellow who spoke first talked about his medical implants. Does that include how many cases of people having heart attacks while they're driving down the highway in that lives saved equation? So I wasn't going to talk about health, but I feel like he opened the door. What I will talk about today are some boring stuff, and others will back me up on this, but I think that these things are hideous. I don't like looking at antennas. I don't like looking at above ground telephone poles in general. So when you add additional equipment, you add height, I think there are serious visual concerns. Professionally, I've been exposed to many people who do not wish to live next to cell towers, so I believe there will be some negative impact to property values. Should this roll out, I've been reading more and more about fiber optic, and this is a tremendous opportunity. So I do believe that there will be additional fiber. Our county is already blessed with a significant backbone of fiber, thanks to George Lucas. And there is an opportunity for us to really get ahead. Some larger businesses like Marin are already taking advantage of this. And I think other businesses and communities should. So I hope that as a part of this long-term rollout, which part of me just drearily accepts probably will happen, that the county is able to somehow take advantage of this fiber rollout that's occurring simultaneously. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And I just want to acknowledge all you folks raising and waving your hands. You're doing a great job, so keep it up. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Frank Leahy. I live in unincorporated Mill Valley, and I'm here to talk about the energy consumption of 5G networks. During Earth Week of 2002, the Marin County Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution that recognized both the gravity of global warming and the responsibility for local action. If the county allows 5G to proceed, then hundreds or even thousands of 5G antennas will be affixed to telephone and light poles in Marin County, and the energy consumed by these antennas will quickly offset any gains the county and citizens of Marin have made since 2002. A study by Swedish expert Andreas André concluded that communications technology could consume a full 20% of all the world's electricity by 2025. A 2017 article in IEEE Communications magazine states that the deployment of a large number of small cells poses new challenges to energy efficiency, but most worrisome, a researcher at Philips Electronics recently said 5G radio networks at current energy efficiency will be a threat to the carbon footprint of each country where it is deployed. Yes. In other words, 5G is a menace not only to our health and well-being, but to the planet as well. If you, like I, believe there's a climate emergency, then we should be making data transmission as energy efficient as possible. Why does the industry want to blanket our neighborhoods with energy-hungry cell phone towers instead of promoting wired and fiber optic networks, which are up to 1,000 times more energy efficient? Do they care about the planet? No, because it's all about money and no thought for the planet's future. I personally believe that the county should state its intention to protect members of the public and the environment by instituting a ban on all 5G installations, and that it be willing to be sued by the industry because I believe it can and will prevail in both the court of public opinion as well as the court of law. But if it's unwilling to go that far, then I suggest that we at least raise the bar on getting a permit. Let me ask you a question. Would you use an upgrade your bathroom permit for an office building or a bridge? No? Then why are we using an upgrade your bathroom permit for a 5G installation? We must also insist that the telcos fully indemnify the county for any lawsuits related to 5G installations or operations, because if you allow permitting without indemnification, then you are putting Marin County taxpayers at risk of being fully financially responsible for any lawsuits. I propose that Marin County create a new cell permit and process based on the one instituted last October by Burlington, Massachusetts, as well as one that I have proposed separately. It's my hope that the council members here tonight will direct the planning department to review and then to create a new small cell permit and process based on these two documents that we be allowed to review and comment on at a future meeting. My background is in electrical engineering and computer science. I'm well versed in what would make a good small cell permit and why specific items are particularly important. And I would be happy to donate my time to help craft a new permanent process. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much.
I would like to enter two items into the public record, the Town of Burlington public policy and my proposed policy
Great.
as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, David Schoenbrunn. As a young broadcast engineer in the 60s, I learned about the epidemiology of brain tumors and EMF exposure. People in my profession then had twice the risk of brain tumors. Ever since then, I've been skeptical of safety claims made about radio frequency equipment. What we've got here today is the modern-day version of the tobacco industry's strategy of sowing doubt. The telecom industry got Congress to make an unprecedented law that essentially says Damn the science, we want investment in this industry. While the science back in the day only knew about the thermal effects of EMFs, it has progressed since then. We now know that weak electric fields can open voltage-gated calcium channels in cell membranes. When that happens, it throws off the internal equilibrium of the cell. While U.S. researchers funded by Telecom tend to not find EMF effects, researchers in the rest of the world have found strong associations with brain tumors and associations with DNA damage, insomnia, depression, and many more illnesses. A good source of this science is bioinitiative.org. What is especially troubling in this land of the free and home of the brave is that the build-out of 5G networks will result in large increases in involuntary EMF exposures. It won't be possible to get away from it. This is the equivalent of the tobacco industry placing machines to spread secondhand smoke throughout neighborhoods. We know that would have been a horrible idea, and so is 5G. I have held multiple FCC licenses. This is not the same FCC that I dealt with. The FCC has become totalitarian, and previous generations of utilities in the streets did not have this scale of health impacts. So that argument by a carrier is nonsensical. And yet, there is no competent scientific evidence that this exposure is benign. Everything I've read suggests that the higher frequencies used by 5G have significantly more harmful biological effects because of their higher energies. Please see 5G for what it is. This powerful industry is rolling out this technology without having done proper safety studies. Do whatever you can to help stop this abuse of economic power. Help organize other governmental bodies to make a facial challenge to the congressional bar to opposing permits on health grounds. Anything less is cosmetic.
Thank you, David. Time's up. Good evening.
Hello. Thank you, supervisors and staff, for hosting the workshop this evening. Most of you already know me for my dedication as a concerned citizen to educate our community and help shape informed decisions.
For the
those
record,
of you,
did you state your name?
Oh, I'm going to say, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Paige Hudson, and I am a Marin County native and have proudly called this home for over 47 years. I'm here tonight to help you focus and refocus on the multitude of scientific and data-driven reasons why Marin County cannot allow 5G to be rolled out in our community. Based on time constraints, I'm going to address just three. The first, and to me the most important, is one that we keep hearing ad nauseum we are not allowed to raise. Precautionary principle aside, to me it's common sense. As a community and as leaders, if we are not looking out for the health and well-being of our community, we are not a smart Marin. With that, I just want to remind all of you that over 240 scientists worldwide are calling for a halt to 4 and 5G rollout, and over 180 scientists and doctors issued the 5G appeal, which is a declaration calling for a moratorium on 5G cell antennas, citing human health effects and impact on wildlife. This is not based only on the over 2,000 peer-reviewed scientific studies showing adverse health effects of wireless radiation, but also based none other than on a $25 million study headed by the National Toxicology Program within the National Institute of Health that determined clear evidence, and I quote, clear evidence that cellular radiation causes cancer, notably an aggressive brain cancer called glioblastoma. Number two, increased fire risk and hindered communications during disasters. More and more equipment added to telephone poles, utility poles, traffic lights, and the like adds stress and could spark and require great diligence and maintenance, especially when other telecoms add their respective equipment called co-location. We are all acutely aware of the very real potential Marin faces for a fire crisis that our dear neighbors to the north have experienced. Despite being the largest power company in the country, the fact that PG&E recently filed bankruptcy as a result of the overwhelming financial responsibility for these fires reminds us of the vulnerability we could face by overloading telephone and utility poles with yet more equipment maintenance challenges and the threat to our communities. Also noteworthy is that 5G small cell antennas are organized in clusters so that they would go down in groups, meaning that entire neighborhoods could lose the ability to communicate and learn about evacuation alerts. Number 3, decreased property values. You've heard a little bit about this tonight, but estimates suggest that 20 to 25% of the value of properties will be affected by these installations, not just because they are unsightly, but because of the real serious health risks to residents, especially children.
Your time is up.
I'll close by just saying, lastly, let's consider one of the strongest messages about the safety of this technology, the fact that no insurance company will issue coverage for telecommunications companies for wireless radiation claims because they know the potential exposure vastly exceeds their risk models. They won't touch them. Thank you.
Good evening.
My name's Rachel Gaunt, and I live in the unincorporated area of Mill Valley. Good evening. Millennials are unaware that the technology they love could harm their future ability to have children, could damage their memory, and could cause them brain cancer. Cellular radiation is a rapidly increasing environmental toxin, and numerous peer-reviewed studies have shown that harmful effects from levels which are well below the current FCC limits. The CDC recently released data about the increased rate of brain, liver and thyroid cancer amongst the under 20-year-olds in the US. That's a new direction. Replicated research has shown that low-level wireless radiation will promote cancer growth in combination with other toxic exposures. In other words, we're already being harmed by the 2G, 3G, and 4G wireless radiation that surrounds us today. Wireless 5G with millimeter length is going to take us into a completely new realm and a complete new level of threat and toxicity. That's why, and we've already mentioned this, so I'll skip over it, but there's the 240 scientists from 41 countries have gone to the United Nations about this, right, demanding that we have better protective exposure guidelines. The US has got one of the highest allowable wireless radiation limits in the world. Why is that? Because 22 years ago, the EPA was defunded and stopped from researching and setting proper limits that would protect us from the biological effects. Instead, they adopted radiation limits from industry-filled groups and outdated science. Another problem is that our agencies, the FCC, are captured at the higher levels, and that's been talked about, so I'll skip over. If this environmental toxin had a color or a smell, we wouldn't be talking today. There would be no debate. You would already be taking action to protect your citizens from harm. Wireless radiation is a proven toxin, even though you can't smell, see, or touch it. It acts upon the human body just like other toxins and in combination with those other toxins. Yes, the Telecommunications Act makes it harder, and yes, the FCC directives make it harder. But as our elected officials, we ask that you be more interested in protecting us from toxic radiation than protecting yourself from getting sued. Right now, most people in Marin only know what they hear in advertising campaigns, but when the scientific truth gets out, they will be demanding protection. So let's get ahead of them, find ways to fight back against the unjust laws, educate yourselves, educate us, be leaders. You can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'd like to put 2 things in the public record. One's peer-reviewed studies showing effect at low levels, and the other is the more recent cancer reports for the under 20-year-olds. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Harry Lehman. I'm from Novato. It's my hometown. I'm here to speak against 5G. I had an interesting This morning, I was, for some reason, found myself listening, and I don't think I've gone there for a long time, to the Youngbloods, that old song, Get Together. I don't know if I've got the lyrics right, but something like, come on, brother, I may have it here someplace, but the bottom line was love one another. And I'm kind of wondering, or putting out as an exercise for us to consider, is how we got from love one another to the level of vitriolic, hateful, antagonistic process that seems to have taken over civility. And I propose to you that this is one issue where it gives us a chance to bridge across that, because it doesn't really matter what your political point of view is. It doesn't matter what party you're registered in or not. This isn't just a risk, it's a hazard. Difference is a risk you can avoid. You can't avoid being saturated by this carcinogen. It will saturate you because it's there and because it's carcinogenic, as the November 2nd, 2018 final report of the National Toxicology Program has shown. This is no longer something that is even in rational dispute. The people coming up and saying that this is not harmful simply have not looked at the scientific data. So I speak on the issue that this is someplace where we may be able to reach towards one another, and I think that would be a good thing. I reference now the work of a man named Bruce Kushnick because his story seems to be important. He tells the story of how the internet superhighway was funded by ratepayers for 6 years, 7 years, and the infrastructure was built and then voluntarily abandoned, including built buildings and headquarters by Verizon and others. It's because why? Because the regulated fiber optic was not making enough money for them, so they went to wireless. Bruce Kushnick's work is in Huffington Post, for example, but you can find it. I hadn't mentioned that in my letter, which you have. I will tender a copy of the letter to the clerk for entrance in the public record. We are in rather a relativistic society now. I think that that's wrong because I think there are some things that are just plain wrong. One of them is subjecting the entire population here to carcinogenic radiation. It just shouldn't be allowed. I hope you'll stand up for it. On the legal issues, I also want to mention separation of powers is something I think should be looked into. And I'll note that the section of the 1996 Act that deals with environmental complaint does not deal with direct physical harm, a different characteristic which I think should be looked at very carefully from a legal standpoint. And I'm going to try to earn some sort of brownie point by stopping before the clock.
You're doing a good job.
Thank
you. Everybody's doing a great job on the hand waving. Keep it up.
Hold it up high, yeah.
Good evening.
Hi, Valerie Hood, Fairfax, and thank you so much. These are yard signs I've been working on, and I think it's very important to have a visual image of microwave, because unlike a microwave oven, there is no beeping, no warning. It's just silent and deadly, especially to children with a thin blood-brain barrier. In this graphic, you can see the radiation lines. In real life, people see nothing. This is the invisible aesthetic. This is the real stealth component. People just go about their business as if it weren't happening, surrounded by fields of radiation. Given that we can see the radiation in this picture, I'd just like us all to reflect, would you allow your front yard or your workplace to be a 5G cell tower site? I think not. We would like to see Marin County to declare itself and us a 5G-free place. I know that I will not allow myself to be subjected to this experiment. A hazard associated with the 5G microwave cell towers is the increased fire danger. That's been talked about. We should note that sparks could come from a 5G utility or light pole. 5G cells and battery systems would worsen the extreme fire danger we already face in Marin, particularly in rural areas of West Marin and Mill Valley. Current lawsuits may very well bring down PG&E, and perhaps just in time for them before the hazardous rollout of 5G and increased fire hazards. According to testimony at a recent council meeting in Washington, D.C., Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re refused to underwrite liability policies for companies that deliver electromagnetic radiation because they understand that down the line there will be lawsuits brought. So there are many questions we need to be asking, and one is, what is the status of Marin and the MGSA in regards to insurance for 5G infrastructure? Who is liable for our county poles? What do you know about MGSA insurance policies? Who will afford the insurance if it can be gotten? What happens to our utility poles and the liability for them if PG&E goes bankrupt and the poles are loaded with 5G, 3G, 4G, and large battery containers on the ground? In case of fire, Santa Rosa with their large fire department had no ability to deal with the situation. What is Marin County going to be doing in such a situation? PG&E is facing a $9 billion in climbing costs due to recent fires. I doubt the county has any sort of liability compared to PG&E, and that should be a huge consideration. Has the MGSA liability policy been made available to the county? Do you have assurances that MGSA will be covered for this new microwave technology? Can staff tell us who's liable for the 5G infrastructure right now? Would MGSA be the primary responsible party that would reimburse the county? I'd suggest that the telecoms, the richest corporations on this earth, worth billions if not trillions, should assume every bit of the insurance liability as a show of good faith at the very least. And has this been considered? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yes, Clayton Smith from unincorporated Mill Valley. Much has been talked about the fire danger from the sparks, but also I think we should consider the desiccation effects of this particular technology on the shrubs and the trees and the tinder that's all over the very deep and poorly roaded canyons of Marin County, which are themselves basically fire explosions all waiting to happen, in which there's really no evacuation plans really in place. Also, the effects on the wildlife and the bird migration patterns. The other issue is a social equity issue. Clearly, only the very wealthy are going to be able to insulate themselves from the potential harms that the deployment of this particular technology may entail. Also, I'd like to bring up the issue of the violation of private property rights. It is generally assumed that public ends at my lot line, and that's where private begins. And it begs my questioning as to how it has come to this point where the government can mandate that a private corporation can involuntarily irradiate the interior of my home. Now this brings the question, what options do local communities have to just opt out of this technology? And I ask, why doesn't the Board of Supervisors write a letter of protest regarding these mandates and instruct Representative Huffman to join with other concerned legislators to oppose them? And finally, I want to recognize this is both a left, right, and center issue. It spans the entire political spectrum. Concerning FCC mandates, I am reminded of the Dred Scott decision and the fugitive slave laws that were in existence at that time. And not surprisingly, this was immediately followed by the Civil War. The feds can only overreach, I feel, for so long, intruding on the lives and the welfare of the general public and local communities. And I think a good example of what this is about, we can look over to France and see the Yellow Vest movement in full regard. I was there on the street in 1968 at the Sorbonne, and I can tell you that this is basically giving people cancer and providing political cover for it is going to be something that the government of this country will dearly regret.
Thank you, Clayton. Good evening.
Good evening. I'll say it out loud. What a beautiful crowd. Shaddai, Shaddai, Adonai, Shaddai, I ask, I task, I command, I pray that all true warriors embrace this play, because to you all behind me, truly it'll be your actions versus their decisions which is be the true choice of the matter. The federal usurpation does not, the federal does not usurp local authority. Your sheriff knows this, And if he happens to be the only sheriff on the West Coast that doesn't, have him check in with Sheriff Mack at the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriff's Peace Officers Association. Black Elk, 100 and some years ago, a sage prophesied that when the power of the wind is returned back to the people, we'll be in the midst of the greatest of changes. And here we are today, a group of people that are paying for air with their cell phones and computers. How insane is that? I mean, really. Those old rotary phones worked a shitload better than these. And so, what is synthetic telepathy? Well, prior to 1970, whether it was 9/11, the shooting of Oscar Grant, the shooting of Andy Lopez, the never-ending non-sanctioned wars, the imprisonment of Leonard Peltier and all sentient beings, the insanity of the oil and slaughterhouse industry, all students would have walked absolutely out of school and labor would follow. For who in their right mind would support financially or otherwise the insane corruption running this nation as the Fed and IRS, unlawfully treasonous entities, rob us blind? There's student strikes going on worldwide, everywhere but in America since 1969. And that, my friends, is UC Berkeley's billion-a-year MKUltra synthetic telepathy program that maintains a subservient acquiescence that we see since 1970. Genesis 19:24, as surely as the fires were commanded, comes now viral, new plagues with quakes until every need of the earth be remanded. Mandatory tree removal, so these insane frequencies travel unimpeded, till most all the sheep be more than neck deep in subservience conceited, already attained a subservient acquiescent class, both of labor and school. You should be nervous, as our labors, taxes, and tuitions all be in service to the Zionist ghoul. Be sure, be clear, and free of fear. 'Twas the Mossad behind 9/11 and the assault on the USS Liberty. I am Peter. I am here speaking truth to power with prophecy. The power of prophecy opens the promised land, being Northern California by the 40-day economic strike command. Bush's, Clinton's, Obama's, and Trump all serve the Catholic Pope, and more so the Nazi, the National Zionist. And after 27 years of denying and mocking the prophecy, freeing Leonard Peltier, who represents the 500-year-plus indigenous resistance of which we are all connected.
Your time is up.
And let me finish it up. Including the U.S. Constitution, one more sentence.
Okay.
The fires of the iron rod of God before all were commanded. For more than a cage to rattle, this be the spiritual battle. I am Peter. I am the brother with the keys, commanding the strike hammer, slam down the freeze frame, the West Coast, till D.C. and Wall Street is nothing but toast. I now freeze all Bay Area transportation by command of Almighty, with Aphrodite, Creator being liberator, as rainbow spirit warriors take us to a higher station.
Thank you.
I say it, you hear it, it is so. I am Peter, I am the brother with the keys.
Your time is up. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. It's going to be short. Okay, my name is Chandu V.S. We live in Santa Fe for over 32 years. I'm very sensitive to wireless radiation. I found out firsthand when a smart meter was installed at our home. I suddenly developed terrible daily headaches. After many tests, my doctor found nothing wrong. Then I visited my family in India for a month, and my headaches went away. When I came back home, my headaches also returned. After speaking at CPUC hearings in San Francisco several times, the commissioner gave me an option to opt out, and my headaches went away when the smart meter was removed from our home. There is an electric pole just outside our home. If they install a 5G antenna on the pole, I'm very concerned about a reoccurrence of my terrible headaches and will not be able to live in our home. Here is a picture of electric pole from outside our bedroom. You can see that. And I have a copy for the county also. I don't want to go through the same health problem again, and I ask for your help. Please do not allow telephone companies to install smart meters, transmitters on residential electric poles. Here is a picture that I showed you from our home. Thank you.
Thank you.
And here's
Good evening.
Hi, my name is Kim Rago. I have lived for 18 years, a half a block from two wireless facilities. I think about 12 antennas. And the one thing that really does strike me is this is industrial equipment. It really shouldn't be in a residence. And I've really been surprised over the years by the lack of maintenance this equipment has gotten. You know, some examples I can give are there was a storm several years ago. It blew open the door to the equipment. It buzzed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, upsetting people. And we didn't get a response for a week and a half. And it took a YouTube video. There's another example where they had made a promise not to maintain equipment at night, and yet they were there doing an upgrade in the middle of the night with flashlights, or at least after dark. And one last thing is they didn't put up the warning signs by all the antennas. And as you know, if you're within 13 feet of the antenna, then there are considerable problems. And I just wonder, how does this work with 5G? Are they going to hire a lot of people to come and maintain all these poles? Should I tell my husband, don't clean out the gutters anymore because the telephone pole's 10 feet away, and if you're on top of the roof, you might be too close? I don't understand how this works. Over the years, a lot of people have asked me, well, you've lived next to antennas for 18 years. Have you noticed any problems? And I say, no, besides being a total grump, I seem to be just fine. Of course, Helena died 2 years ago from salivary gland cancer. Nancy had uncontrollable headaches and seizures. They seem to be under control. Sharon across the street had breast cancer. She's in recovery. Nancy next door to her had, she had it's become lung cancer, but it started as breast cancer. And then up the street, Carol's husband has a brain tumor, and Norm now needs a new heart, and there's so much wrong with Dwayne that I don't know where to start. So I don't know if any of this has anything to do with the radiation. There's so many pollutants in our world right now. But what I do know is I can't go back to my neighborhood and tell them we're bringing in 5G because your movies are going to download faster. I do know that they don't care. And I also know that despite the fact that all of us have different cell services, our 911 calls go through just fine.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Barry Smith. I live in Point Way Station. And I had some things to say that our previous speaker alluded to. I feel, I've been looking at 5G for a while, and I must confess I'm a little skeptical about the industry's claims about the benefits and their intention. See, it doesn't seem to me that it's all about bringing innovative technologies to underserved populations. It doesn't seem to me it's all about preventing collisions on highways. It seems to me that it really has a lot to the explosion of broadband really has something to do a lot more prosaic. It does seem to have to do with Netflix and Amazon Prime. So I guess the question for us as a larger community is, even if there's doubts about, in some quarters about the health effects, I think we could all agree that nursing mothers, infants, children, cancer survivors, people with chronic health effects, and older people, I would say that's maybe 25 to 30% of your constituents, are commonsensically affected by constant radiation. So the question, I think, regardless of the FCC, is how many of our neighbors are we going to throw under the bus so we can download Game of Thrones Season 8 quicker than we could do it before? Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Coftray. I live in the unincorporated area in San Anselmo. And before I start, there was a woman that wondered how to submit her documents to you. Do you want to address that so she knows?
She can just provide them to the clerk here.
Okay. Anyway, I have sent a previous letter to the supervisors and to Planner Barraquette. I want to thank you for your efforts to protect Marin's health from unnecessary degradation. I feel compelled to speak for those of us whose health has already been impaired by far fewer emissions than the proposed 5G rollout. There are those of us who would be here tonight, but who cannot tolerate the amount of EMF, RF in this room. They probably did not get the notifications because they are not able to use a computer anymore. For those with electromagnetic sensitivity, EMS, the desire for more pervasive coverage is really incomprehensible. With all due respect, we have already served as the experiment. We live the consequences, and we are the data, and we hope that you will consider us. Technology has outpaced the medical research on the effects of wireless radiation on health. The FCC regulation reflects this, referencing outdated research. It is not known why one person would be affected and another able to sustain the same load unharmed. It is known that the potential for negative health impact increases with greater exposures. The more sources, the greater exposure. With fewer places to totally avoid it and installation distances overlapping the understated 5G reach, the cumulative effect mounts. The 5G regulations do ensure one thing, that we will be exposed to far more radiation than we are currently. For those of us living with EMS, no faster, better marketing terminology will convince us to risk more of our health. Therefore, I must urge a delay in implementation of 5G, pending the results of necessary medical studies on health effects. I also urge the board to vote to request Congressman Huffman's co-sponsorship of H.R. 530, restoring control in deployment of 5G.
Your time is up. Can you wrap up?
Yes. Should implementation be unavoidable, the location preferences protecting residential and green spaces are very appropriate. Both are critical for avoidance and recovery by all of those with this existing illness. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie's husband, and I'm also a board-certified emergency department physician and pediatrician, currently retired. I basically have two simple points to make. One is that I have witnessed the effects of EMF on my wife, and it's real. The second point, I did spend some time as EMS director on the Mendocino Coast up in Fort Bragg. And I've looked at what telecommunications devices are used in this county, and it's similar. It's a Motorola system. It does not require 5G or, from that reason, matter 4G or any other G. You have a system that your emergency services uses. If they do require, for some reason, to use a phone, they basically are speaking or doing limited data, and a 3G or a 4G will take care of that. So my simple point is that 5G is not needed for emergency services in this county. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Sharon Rushton, Chairperson for Sustainable Tam Almonte. Thank you for considering amendments to the County Telecommunications Facilities Policy Plan to better regulate small cell wireless facilities for 5G technology. We are very concerned about the serious adverse health and environmental effects that may be caused by exposure to microwave radiation emitted by 5G small cell facilities. We are also concerned that small cell facilities may increase fire risks, decrease property values, and degrade the traditional residential character of Marin County neighborhoods. We urge you to follow the precautionary principle and limit the placement of these risky antennae to the greatest degree possible. Please heed the advice from the BB&K law firm. Their legal alert states, and this is a quote, "The FCC small cell orders may eventually be overturned. We are not recommending that you incorporate the FCC standards into law per se. If you do so, then you will be bound by your own requirements, even if the FCC order is vacated. Therefore, except for complying with procedural requirements," that was the end of the quote, this is now me again. Therefore, except for complying with procedural requirements such as shot clocks, we recommend that you direct staff to develop highly protective regulations for small cell facilities, including those listed in our letter. Most importantly, prohibit small cell wireless facilities in residential areas like Mill Valley's ordinance. 2, require a minimum safe distance of preferably 1,500 feet between a small cell facility and any residence, similar to Petaluma's ordinance. 3, require a minimum distance of 3,000 feet between small cell facilities, since that's the distance the radiation emitted by the facilities can travel. 4, establish an upper limit of 100 microwatts per square meter for public exposure of radio frequency electromagnetic microwave radiation. And we have many other recommendations in our letter. I hope that you will read it if you haven't done so already. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Garloff, and I am electrically sensitive. And when I first realized what was going on about 10 years ago, a very good friend of mine recommended I write down my symptoms before I try just getting rid of some of the electrical devices in our home. And I wanted to read to you what I wrote down because I'd forgotten some of these things. But what it's like to be me right now, back then, was started with cognitive issues. I had difficulty concentrating, confusion, what I called scrambled brain syndrome, difficulty completing sequential tasks. I was an administrator, a pretty competent one for a nonprofit, and my skills were deteriorating very quickly. I suffered from depression, anxiety, panic attacks, anger, irritability, and headaches, sleep disorders, difficulty sleeping, grinding my teeth, chronic fatigue. I had breathing problems, shortness of breath, increased allergies, heart palpitations, nosebleeds in coffee shops, digestive and lower tract disorders, chronic pain, aching joints and muscle stiffness, balance problems, dizziness, eye strain and vision problems, dry skin, rashes, eczema. My fingernails and toenails were separating from the skin. I call this my litmus finger because when I go into really bad areas, it starts tingling. Unusual weight gain. Oh my God, I gained 50 pounds. It was just grotesque. I read a magazine article about the fact that cell phone radiation caused agglutination of the red blood cells, and I realized the shortness of breath episodes I was having was not due to asthma, it was my cell phone. And I started working in the next couple of years fighting to restore the health of me and my family, removing all wireless radiation from our homes. So we don't want to live in wireless radiation 24/7. You don't want to become me. You don't want to become electrically sensitive. Some people are affected more than others, yes, but damaged DNA is damaged DNA, whether it's being caused by gamma rays, X-rays, or cell phones. So please, fiber optics, You've got the science, you've got the materials, you've got the tools to make the right decisions. I will suffer for having been here tonight in the next few days, but there's nothing more important than making the world a better place for life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello. My name is Jess Lerner, and I'm here with an organization called 5G Free Marin. We're presenting you and have presented you with a report containing excellent recommendations, which I'll address in a moment, but first I'm just going to share a bit about my story, and I'm going to try to talk fast and stay on time. In grad school, I lived in a house with friends in Providence, Rhode Island, while studying environmental science at Brown. We had just gotten a wireless router. That was the first time I noticed a wireless sensitivity, and in the years to come, with exposure increasing, it would become impossible to ignore. Some of my symptoms, not unlike the list previously read, include headaches, heart pounding and racing, hands shaking, feeling lightheaded, weak, and the worst one of all was no sleep. I just started not being able to sleep anywhere there were cell towers or meters. By the time I moved to a bigger city in 2007 and more towers went up in urban areas, my sleep got worse. I eventually developed an autoimmune illness. However, whenever I'd take a trip away from those towers and smart meters and when I unplugged the routers around me, I noticed something remarkable. I slept deeply, and in 1 or 2 days felt like myself. My health started to come back, and my body got stronger. Well-known and respected doctors confirmed that I have electromagnetic sensitivity and that that's the issue, as well as many other patients they would see. Their best recommendation was to get away from it. It being the wireless cell towers, smart meters, and routers. That's the best recommendation right now. So living in Marin, I've been safer and able to sleep and recover, but I constantly have to be concerned that I'll lose my right to health, safety, and the ability to sleep in my own home due to this overreach of power and unnecessary and dangerous technology being forced on the public without exception. This would be discrimination and create serious access barriers for many. There are better solutions, such as fiber, as we've talked about. So if these towers go up, there will be no way to go to for those of us who suffer, no way to reclaim our health. Many people aren't even aware their symptoms are connected to wireless. This is a growing population, including children, elderly, millennials, and not a tiny percentage of people. So today we're still following that 1996 FTA, written over 22 years ago, that says we can't address health. We know that it's not safe. Millimeter and submillimeter waves have never been tested on or near humans. And we know that this industry is saying as long as there's no proven harm on their end, they may move forward for profit. The FCC refuses to operate using the precautionary principles. They like to say, doubt is our product. So right now, all over Marin, towns and cities are writing and revising ordinances, and town officials are responding actively to the outcry of the public. We must preserve our local control and our rights. So we're not looking at what we can't do, but what we can do. How can we creatively shape an ordinance that reflects our needs, values, and concerns without giving up our rights to health, safety, privacy, and property values? So the good news is we have those tools already outlined and ready for you to review. Our organization has come up with a thoroughly researched list of 18 options that would legally tighten a wireless ordinance, and many towns and cities have found all of those recommendations valuable to include going forward. We've provided you with those documents outlining them, and we hope you'll read them and take them seriously in hard copy and electronically.
Great. Your time is up.
Yes, I'm wrapping up. Finally, we're confident you can create that ordinance, and as Mayor Matt Brown of San Anselmo has said, 5 bars is not worth compromising the health of our community. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for hearing us
Good
tonight.
evening.
My name is Roberta Anthes. I'm from Fairfax, and I'm also a member of the 5G Free Marin Task Force. I support all the recommendations that were handed to you by our group. I have a couple suggestions along those lines. As one speaker said, please don't incorporate any of the specific FCC standards into the county ordinance. Number 2, please write an exceptions chapter. Without this, all of your provisions and denials will be subject to challenge as prohibitive, unless you define what constitutes a viable exception. Fairfax is considering the one that I just handed to you. It combines the more general terms of the current Fairfax ordinance with the specific requirements in San Anselmo's ordinance without limitation. In other words, their minimum requirements. It includes alternative analysis, as was mentioned before. It also includes hiring an independent consultant at the applicant's expense. It includes public input on alternative sites, a public appeals process, and a hearing. The public should be part of the dialogue, consistent with the democratic process. The exceptions chapter, as well as the compliance with law chapter, should include the Americans with Disability Act and the Endangered Species Act. These are federal laws, equal in authority with the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996. That act forbids consideration of environmental effects of RFR. But while people and animals live in the environment, they don't constitute the environment. The ADA is intended to protect disabled people from discrimination, and it provides a definition for disability that would fit most EMS sufferers. The Endangered Species Act is intended to protect animals from extinction, and numerous studies by institutions like the U.S. Department of Interior, the NIH, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, the USDA, and the Department of Entomology at Cornell have indicated that RFR is harmful to many different species. Bees, for instance, lose their navigational abilities within a half mile of a facility, and they're dying, and we all know that. They're vital to California's $11 billion almond industry, as well as 62% of food crops worldwide. These two laws should be included in the county ordinance and used as intended. And lastly, please include an annual recertification requirement as per Burlington, Massachusetts. This provision alone, without being prohibitive, was enough to inspire Verizon to withdraw its application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Sarah Amanoff. I am actually a member of South Alameda County Sierra Club, one of 10,000 members of Sierra Club, but not speaking on behalf of the club. But there are quite a few members who share this. So I want to reiterate about the bees, the research on the bees, that it induces biochemical changes and even impacts bee reproduction, and there's been damage to trees and plants, and Sierra Club DC actually testified regarding concern for the tree canopy. That aside, I also want to throw in, also speaking on behalf of a woman named Diana, who is in Marin. She cannot come here tonight because she was at her father's house in another city, and the neighbor decided to have a Verizon cell tower on their property within 300 feet. And that damaged her, and she had some was immune compromised already with Lyme and chemical sensitivities, and she had a cascade reaction. She was just a normal person using her phone, streaming, and no longer she can't even touch. Not only can she not touch her phone, she can't tolerate electricity. She had a severe reaction. Just to give you a heads up. Our children deserve to be able to play in our front yards or build a tree house without being next to a close proximity cell tower. So thank you. So you know these things, it's not safe. You can't get within 1 foot of one antenna for these things. And then if there's 3 antenna, then you can't get within 10 feet. And you're gonna have children play next to it. These things can't be monitored, there'll be so many. Did you know, I'm gonna talk about the firefighters in San Francisco, and I work in San Francisco. And I've seen those cell towers, those small cells, and P.S., some children cannot come to school now due to headaches. In Lakeshore Elementary in San Francisco. Thank you for putting the small cell in front of Lowell High School in San Francisco. Did you know that the firefighters requested exemptions from cell towers for health reasons? Industry-friendly California legislator may claim they know nothing about health concerns, but in fact they do. The legislator granted an exemption from SB 649 to firefighters who requested it for health reasons. Throughout California, firefighters have long complained of often disabling symptoms from cell towers on their stations. Firefighters live and sleep in the stations when on duty and have experienced significant RF radiation exposure. They basically score in the 98th percentile of health. Do we here? I don't think so. Symptoms included neurological impairment, severe headache, confusion, inability to focus, lethargy, inability to sleep, inability to wake up for 911 emergency calls. Firefighters have reported getting lost on 911 calls in the same community they grew up in.
Your time is up.
Oh, thank you. And can I wrap up? And one veteran medic forgot where he was in the midst of a basic CPR on a cardiac victim and couldn't recall how to start the procedure over again. Do not make this mistake.
Thank you.
It's all as easy and so simple as
No. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
It's my time.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Nick Meredith, and I live in the city of Mill Valley. I've been a willing consumer of technology for many years, and I admit to being an early adopter of everything in the wireless space. Until recently, I had no idea about the harm that radiation emitting from my devices caused. When you separate facts from spin, the science is clear. Low-level wireless radiation causes biological harm to humans, aptly enough on a cellular level, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. Which is why wireless radiation has gone from a possible carcinogen to a probable carcinogen, and now in Canada to a definite carcinogen. The telcos know this. By their own admission, they are not trying to convince us that wireless radiation is safe. Instead, they aim to keep doubt alive so that the debate continues and the can gets kicked down the road. Their industry-funded research is consistently at odds with independent research, and I will put this into the record. Independent studies found 70% correlation of harm from wireless radiation compared to industry-funded studies, which only had a 32% indication of harm, which allows them to say, our studies disagree. Oh, well, then if we don't yet know for sure, let's just carry on and, as we are and see how much money we can make before it's proven. Telecoms need to carry on innovating in order to stay in business. Bringing out new products is how they make money. They have deep pockets, vast advertising and lobbying campaigns, spinning angles to distract and seduce us, while in contrast, the science tells the truth. Right now, the FCC is run by an ex-Verizon executive who's being sued and is essentially regulating itself and favoring telecoms over the health and well-being of the people. So the agencies set up to protect us are captured and colluding. I like my phone, but I love my health more. I use my phone for essential services, phone calls and texts, and according to my usage with Verizon, not that often. So being able to download the latest video as I'm walking in a few seconds is not an essential service, even if Verizon tries to tell me it is. And as far as I'm aware, I cannot watch that movie any faster. What's essential to me is my life, my health and my freedom, and my right to protect my home from uninvited and unwanted wireless radiation pollution. Please pass an immediate, strong ordinance to protect citizens and push back against the FCC under your oath. As far as I'm aware, Republican testicles are just as damageable as Democratic testicles. Please put the ball back in their court and demand that telecoms prove that 5G is safe before we, and I include all of us in that, become ongoing experiments.
Thank
The
you.
precautionary principle demands nothing less. Thank you very much.
You guys are doing a great job, hand wavers. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Good evening.
Good evening. To the Board of Supervisors, thank you. Oh, my name is Trish Borstein from the unincorporated area of Novato. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I urge the board to state that fiber optic cable is a priority for our telecommunications infrastructure here in Marin County. It is safe, reliable, more secure, and provides greater speed than the proposed 5G system. Just state, as part of the public record, that fiber optic is our preferred telecommunications infrastructure. We will figure out the details of who and how we will pay for it later. Let's take a closer look at what the telecom industry is proposing for our beautiful county, the place we all love and the place we all call home. The 5G rollout will blanket the entire county with thousands of antennas endangering over 200,000 people with inescapable, involuntary millimeter microwave radiation exposure. This is the stuff of horror movies that cannot be allowed. The negative bioeffects of this technology are too great. The impact on all of us, from pregnant women and infants to school children who trust that their parents and teachers will protect them, and to the aged and infirm to undertake such a dangerous experiment. Hundreds of scientists and doctors throughout the world are calling for a moratorium on the rollout of 5G, and I urge the board to do the same. Thousands of studies prove the harm of this technology from neurological damage to carcinogenic effects. You cannot, in good conscience, ignore the scientific evidence. You have a duty to all the residents of Marin to safeguard our environment by enacting a moratorium on this technology. Aside from precipitating a health crisis in Marin with all the suffering and financial burden that entails, there will be a dramatic decrease in property values. Estimates suggest a drop of up to 25% for homes closest to these 5G antennas. Well, if you live in a 2-story home, that's more than a 50%, as the second story will be in the direct line of assault.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Ruth Wiseman, and I live in Kenfield. I would like to continue the previous statement. You cannot mitigate or block this radiation in your home. It passes through walls. This is a wholesale theft of Marin residents' personal assets, our homes, and will result in a significant reduction in property values and the resultant taxes for all communities in Marin. Who will compensate us for this loss in value? We are talking about millions and millions of dollars of loss. Who will be held responsible for this? The telecom industry or the people that signed the permits allowing them entry into our communities? I understand that you may feel pressure to follow the federal law as determined by a captured government agency that is closely linked to the wireless industry. There is a reason that the FCC enacted a ruling that stipulates that communities cannot consider the health effects of this technology, as the FCC doesn't want anything to stand in the way of a massive deployment of wireless infrastructure across the country. They simply don't care about the harmful health effects, the potential profit, the billions of dollars of projected economic activity is guiding the entire industry. But you must care. You need to follow the law that all government servants are tasked with. Enacting and enforcing laws that protect the health and safety of your constituents. That is your duty. That is your primary responsibility. We know that you are not responsible for the FCC ruling. However, by going forward, by not refusing it, by carrying it out, you become complicit. Dear supervisors, you are our first line of defense in this story. Without permits, the telecom industry cannot enter our neighborhoods and radiate us all. We are trusting that you understand fully your responsibilities and will enact a moratorium on the rollout of 5G in Marin County. Anything less is a betrayal of the public's trust. I'd like to enter the statement into the public record, and I would like you to distribute it to the rest of the...
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, supervisors. I'm Vicki Sievers. I do education and outreach work with the EMF Safety Network. I'm a San Rafael resident, one of the San Rafael residents who slithered inside City Hall to help work on their December 17th ordinance. We are finally unable to ignore the horrific effects of climate change as we watch the destruction of life and resources that support it. We were warned, but we did not take heed in time. We've been warned about the destructive effects of EMFs, and even though scientists, physicians, and affected individuals are saying, look, we are failing to take heed. A neighbor of mine told the San Rafael City Council that fiddling with an ordinance is tantamount to rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. She meant that leaders at all levels should be refusing 5G altogether because it spells disaster. She's right. It's critical that we confront the threats of 5G fully informed by science. In November, Dr. Martin Paul, the leading expert on the mechanisms by which EMFs cause biological harm, told a Tucson audience, 5G is vastly more dangerous than what we already have. All the industry claims about safety are completely and utterly wrong. He says, the risks we are taking are extraordinary, risks that no rational society should take. But we are taking them, and that's based on exposures we already have. He says 5G will carry higher levels of pulsations, higher frequencies, and millions of antennas widely distributed. These properties predict that 5G will be vastly more dangerous. He points out the industry claims that 5G effects will be limited to the outer millimeters of the body. This is untrue. Paul predicts particularly severe effects associated with the aqueous, the watery parts of the body, blindness, kidney failure, prenatal abnormalities from affected amniotic fluid, and severe vascular effects. EMFs make plants more flammable, and it is Dr. Paul's opinion that, quote, the stunning heat of California's wildfires is likely to have been caused by the impact of our already extant EMFs. Dr. Paul states that it is highly probable that we are facing several existential threats because evidence of damage is already here. First, a crash in our collective brain function. You've heard testimony about people's difficulty with cognitive function. A crash in our reproductive function, massive impacts on our gene pool, and major ecological disaster. He concluded his talk by saying, current plans already approved by the FCC do not include one single biological safety test. This is absolute insanity.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jim Heddle with the Ecological Options Network, and we're based in Bolinas. The question before us, one of the key questions, is what's wrong with the FCC? And I submit to you that it's as simple as Ajit Pai. Ajit Pai was a former Verizon executive, an attorney, and he boasts now about being a tool of the industry in his current position. The FCC is a quintessential captured regulatory agency run by the very industry it's supposed to regulate. It started with the Telecom Act of 1996, preemptively disallowing human health and ecological impacts from legal consideration. Why? Because even back then, they knew of harmful impacts, just like with asbestos, tobacco, and carbon-caused climate disruption. As early as 1996, Zori Glazer, a Navy researcher, was assigned to compile a list of harmful effects from electromagnetic exposure. He listed 17 categories of impacts, including on heart and nervous system, mood disorders, and chromosome damage. A subsequent government document warned that setting exposure safety standards low enough to be safe, truly safe, would interfere with both military weaponization and commercial development of RF technology. And I'll submit these for the record. So current FCC safety standards are not safe and have no connection to current peer-reviewed scientific knowledge. So regulations requiring that telecoms comply with them are but meaningless gestures. The current assault on local and state sovereignty is part of the same corporate agenda. I want to call people's attention to two books. Surveillance Valley by journalist Yashil Levine shows the seamless connections between military and corporate development of the internet, including so-called encryption applications. Surveillance Capitalism by Harvard professor Shoshana Luboff, defines surveillance capitalism as an expropriation of critical human rights that is best understood as a coup from above and overthrow of the people's sovereignty. 5G is part of this attempted coup from above, and I urge you to resist it.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Falcone, and I live in unincorporated San Rafael. There's a main subject that I would like to address, but I want to just expand on some of the subjects that were addressed before me. Number one is that yes, the FCC, according to Harvard's ethics department, is a captured agency. In other words, a government agency which is run by the people it's supposed to regulate, run by the industry it's supposed to regulate. Then they are, if you look at their internal documents, they're taking a page from Big Tobacco, which is you do not have to prove 5G is safe. You merely have to keep the question as to whether it's safe or not alive. Also, I just wanted to say that it's not just the sparks and tinders that make plant life more flammable. It's the plants release something called terpenes, which increases their flammability in 5G. That's a defense against 5G. What I primarily wanted to address is miscarriage. Because most 5G research looks at cancer. And there's a very long latency period with cancer from exposure to consequence. So Kaiser Permanente Institutional Review Board, Kaiser Permanente Northern California, looked at miscarriage. And this was very significant because a lot of things can happen in an intervening period, and there's a lot of exposures between exposure to Wi-Fi and exposure to a negative health consequence. The Kaiser's research arm looked at 913 pregnant women in this area, and they found that they divided them. They didn't have them live their lives any differently, but they looked at women who had just as a matter of course, had higher exposures to EMFs and lower. And being in the group that had higher EMF levels, they had close to 3 times, 300% the risk of miscarriage. Also, children have thinner skulls, and so the specific absorption rate, which is what 1996 is based on, of how much electromagnetic frequency is absorbed, that's based on a 200-pound man who's 6 feet tall, not little children. And
your time is up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Tiffany Baer. I'm a medical doctor, board certified in internal medicine. And when I grew up in Marin, you declared this a nuclear-free zone. And I am urging you to declare it a 5G zone and become a leader for the nation. Aside from the people in this room, most people don't know what's about to hit them. But hopefully with enough awareness, we will prevent this catastrophe from happening. Most people still have the idea that there's some agency out there protecting their health. I'm sure that most people believe this technology is industry tested and known to be safe. But quite the contrary is true. Why do I call it a catastrophe? There are thousands of studies which show the harmful effects of EMFs. And sadly, children are affected to a greater degree because of their thinner skull, increased water content of their brain, and increased cell division. They are more vulnerable to the effects, and there have never been any safety studies on children. France recognized this and has banned cell phone use in children less than 3 years old and limited its use in kids less than 6 years old. They recognize that children need extra protection. In the UK, they issued a warning only to use cell phones for essential calls in those under 16 years old. The FCC's safety standards rely on thermal studies. In other words, how much is your skin heated when you hold the phone to your ear? But the effects go much deeper than the skin, and they affect all of our biology. The biologic effects have been studied far and wide. They include, as many of these things have already been said, lowered fertility, neuropsychiatric disorders like ADD and autism, DNA damage, endocrine effects, dementia, cancer, especially of the brain and the heart, and cardiac electrical dysfunction. So who is protecting us from these dangers? It is not the FCC and it's not the industry. Deemed by the World Health Organization as a Class 2B carcinogen, it's a probable carcinogen. No agency is really in charge of our health regarding EMFs. Therefore, it is up to the legislators. And that means it's up to individual communities like Marin County to stand up and say no to this untested technology.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Dwayne Post, and I grew up in Tamalpais Valley, and have lived most of my 67 years in the Mill Valley area. When I was living in town, just off of Miller Avenue, had an apartment there for about 40 years, and just within 100 feet or so, they put up 3 cell towers. And I was concerned about it because I had heard some negative things. So I talked to the person who put them there, who owned the property, and he kind of laughed. So I looked into it, and I was really amazed at the amount of work and research that had been done. And I was also quite surprised that the standards are so much higher in Europe. For example, they reached the conclusion that children were more affected generally. And so they wouldn't allow cell phone towers close to schools, which is a great idea. So anyway, I decided to, with this new 5G movement, I dropped by Verizon, and asked them what they could tell me about it. And he says, oh, well, this is going to be good news to you because it turns out that these things are much lower. There's more of them, but if you live next to one, it won't be as dangerous. And then I looked into it a little further, and I found out the higher frequency is, as far as the research has been done so far, far more dangerous. So I want to give a shout out to my sister, who is a member of the Tamalpais Valley Review Board, April Post. And she was instrumental in removing the cell phone tower above the fire department building, which was applauded by the whole community there, because she convinced them of the dangers. Now, speaking of fire departments, I saw on the news that they did a report on the coming 5G, and they talked about these cell towers in general. And they talked about how, I think it was in San Francisco, that there was one firehouse that they had a cell phone tower on the roof, and the people were affected. They had memory loss and fatigue, and they decided to ban them on all firehouses throughout the county. So I thought that was very interesting and also rather revealing. There's another thing they mentioned in the newscast, and I'll wrap it up, and that is that the 5G is being tested now with laboratory mice. And the results are due supposedly fairly soon.
Your time is up.
Okay,
so
and I
up.
would very much like if that were be presented transparently and to the public, because when it comes down to it, it's better to be safe than sorry before we make such a large move.
Thank
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for hearing us all out at 3 minutes. I'm Dr. Sandy Ross from Mill Valley, and all life systems operate by electrical, magnetic, and chemical communications. So all aspects will be affected, becoming damaged at different rates and locations in different people. And I know Marty Paul very well that Vicki was talking about, and he's got it figured out how the damage is. So if you can get a copy of what she wrote, it would be helpful. I've also read Zori Glazer's research, and it is shocking. One of the simple things you can remember is that the EMFs and RFR dry out your cells, so the nutrients can't get in, the garbage can't get out, so that they begin to break down, each in its own way, which causes all the different symptoms that people have, and that's why doctors get confused, because people break down where their weakest points are. We should be able to decide for ourselves if we want these emanations in our space. The problem is they aren't confinable, and these rapacious companies want to spew them everywhere so they can make lots of money. And as you are public officials, you have an obligation to not offer public space or the private space of my house for this commercialization. It's not needed. Hey, fiber is at almost every phone pole in Marin County. We paid for it through our AT&T for a number of years. All it has to do is be hooked up from the pole to your house. And if you use fiber optics, then you have no Wi-Fi problem at all. Also, I know there's ways around it. I sat and listened to Larry Bergman the other night, Larry Bragman, and he rattled off a whole lot of ideas. And I just saw the letter from Harry Lehman offering you some time to help. So if you clearly direct your legal department to protect the people of Marin, you'll find a way. But your message has to be loud and clear. Don't willy-wash. Just say no. I also have a couple of other things you should know. I'm very much against all this aesthetic stuff. I want all of those dangerous toxic boxes painted yellow with danger all over them. And a second sort of last little bit here, and that is, if you really get stuck, which I hope you don't, make sure that there's very easy opt-outs, that anyone can opt out who wants to. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Mary Beth Brannigan from the Ecological Options Network in Bolinas. And I want to thank you very much, Supervisors Connolly and Rodoni, for the work you've done on this committee. And I can see that the CDA staff has tried to, within the letter of the law, protect us as much as possible. But unfortunately, as you well know, the current FCC law really does prevent the health values, privacy values, property values, as well as the well-being of the environment from being considered. So, therefore, we at EON urge you to direct staff to develop amendments even more protective and stronger than those in the staff report. And also to heed the BB&K warning about making it all provisional. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have a 5G moratorium? And we don't want to have our local laws preventing that because we did it too soon. Just last month, another study was published by the National Institute of Health Biotechnology Institute and was in PubMed. The study compared teenagers after 2 years exposure to microwave radiation from cell towers near their school. One school had more microwave radiation than the other. And after 2 years, those youngsters in the school with more microwave radiation had scored significantly lower in cognitive ability, memory, and spatial skills, plus other things. I mean, are these types of established effects included in the prohibition in Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act? We have to pretend that these things aren't existing. And I'm so glad that a previous speaker brought up the miscarriage rate. That's shocking. That's done by Kaiser right here, that research. 3 times as bad, higher miscarriage rates. Also, I wanted to bring up, again, Representative Anna Eshu's H.R. 530 as a hope, and that because it would reverse, you know that, it would reverse the FCC rulings. And so therefore, I wanted to, again, encourage you to think about that BB&K recommendation about provisional.
Your time is up.
Section. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Kim Hahn, and I've lived in Marin County my entire life and in San Rafael for over 40 years. Thanks for letting me speak tonight. I would like to address the issue of fiber optics. In your packet, at least the one I saw online, you will find the blue PowerPoint deck called Fiber Optic Cable versus 5G Wireless. My colleague Bob Berg and I originally created this piece for the city of San Rafael. Bob will speak next on updates that we have written since this first version was released. Fiber optic cable is made up of tiny strands of glass encased in plastic cladding. Data is transmitted along the glass fiber in the form of light. It won't melt or burn, it won't rust, it won't overload a utility pole and start fires. And the signal travels up to 60 miles before it begins to degrade. Bob will detail more comparisons between fiber optic cable and 5G antennas. But I would like to explain how we all got to this point in history, where we are now being offered the inferior option, 5G antennas. I will draw from the Lost Arts radio audio on the homepage of mystreetmychoice.com and from the Book of Broken Promises by Bruce Kushnick, Kushnick. You can Google Kushnick and find articles he's posted over the years. He is an expert on this topic. Since the mid-1990s, the state public telecom utilities have collected hundreds of billions of dollars from landline customers for the purpose of upgrading copper wire lines to fiber optic service. Some of the work was done mainly on the East Coast. But then the parent holding companies of these state public telecom utilities, AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, and Frontier, pocketed the money and never delivered the promised fiber optic service. Instead, they fraudulently transferred these funds to their private wireless subsidiaries to build out 4G LTE. We're talking about the use of public monies for private gain to the tune of over $650 billion. The FCC knows all about this. In fact, they went one step further and aided and abetted this fraud of the American people. And now they're going to turn around and charge us even more money to use their 5G network that depends entirely on fiber optics to activate the 5G antennas. The phone companies are going to lay the rest of the fiber optic cable that we've already paid for to hook up the 5G antennas that will radiate us and make us sick so that they can charge us to use this inferior technology to do what is already being done with cable and copper lines at only a smidgen less speed. Because George Lucas has already laid 2 loops of fiber optic cable throughout Marin, this is a perfect opportunity for the county to utilize them to install fiber to the premises rather than to 5G antennas. Let's hope we use this fiber that he has laid, and then we won't have to write a sequel to Kushnick's book called The Book of Missed Opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, supervisors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Bob Berg. I'm a 19-year resident of the Mount Marin area of San Rafael. And I'd like to just talk about the comparison between 5G wireless and the much better alternative that's of fiber optic cable that is faster, safer, cheaper, and more aesthetically pleasing than the option of 5G wireless. So I put together a handout. There's a comparison sheet right here, just running down the list. Fiber optic cables, 10 times faster, at 1 gigabyte speed per second. It's zero health risk, zero fire risk, zero breakdown in communication in the event of a fire because the fiber optic cable runs through conduit. It's an aesthetically pleasing solution because there's no antennas involved. It is something that communities that have adopted fiber optic cable to the homes throughout the entire community have experienced 3% gains in property value, as opposed to the alternative of 20 to 25% decreases in property value with a plethora of antennas every few houses in a neighborhood. There's no privacy loss, no hacking. There's lower monthly rates than wireless costs. So get this, 10 times faster, less cost. You know, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's a good investment because you've got the infrastructure to install dark fiber that can continue to serve the community, and it's a green solution that uses less power because it's fiber optic cable, it's light being emitted over the cables as opposed to electricity. So the thing that I wanted to point out is that we've got a gift in our backyards. George Lucas already installed a fiber optic backbone. The internet backbone has already been laid. It's in the maps that you have in your handout right here. And he's laid it to serve Lucas Valley. It's already being used to now serve Nicasio and other communities out to the west. And it's the smart move. We've got this incredible opportunity where the backbone is already there. All we need to do is to partner with a company that's special, like a company like Zio, through a public-private partnership. You can do that through a competitive RFP bid model to have somebody like Zio come in and work and install the last mile to the premise. As I said, it's already been done in Nicasio and other coastal communities are next on deck for that. So I urge you, put a moratorium on 5G. We don't need it. We don't want it. You've heard all the reasons why it's a bad situation for us and it's bad financially for us. Let's focus on the solution and let's focus on the partnership with the community to use fiber optic cable.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you all for letting us speak. Now, about this survey, this illustrious survey. Okay, I have a series of questions. I found it suspicious, the first question right off the bat.
Could you tell us your name?
Oh, yeah, my name's Bob Ernst.
Thanks.
And I've lived in San Rafael for 30 years.
Thank you.
The question seems to be widespread among not just myself and the own voices in my mind, but others outside of me, that because it's recognized as kind of a leading question, kind of like a, cigarettes are okay question. So was this deliberate? That's the first question. The second question, who initiated the design of it? The third question, how was the designing company selected? Were they vented? By what pathways are people being made aware of it? And what is the intended use for the results? Those are some of my questions about the survey. It did strike me as a bit of an advertisement. This is globally, from everything that we've heard, this is a more existential sort of presentation that seems to be becoming more concrete all the time. What has happened to the original, the individual? Have we as a species become such sheep that we just follow each other or some corporation that says they're an individual over the edge? Everything is disappearing. I mean, the concept of opportunity, it swamps over us like a river gone mad. I ain't kidding. No, I ain't kidding. The almighty get ahead, yeah. Drives us on. It rules our dreams. I ain't kidding. Look at it out there. Everything is becoming less than the beauty, the majesty it once was. And I'm not just talking like an old fogey. I work with young people. They're just as freaked out. And I'm a total believer in 7 generations. And the precautionary principle, those two things should be concrete guiding focuses, because everything out there is becoming less than the beauty, the majesty it once was. It really is. I mean, and we desire freedom. We say we're willing to go to bat, we're willing to fight for it. And then the minute we see it, we somehow try to figure out how to corporatize it and fence it in. And as you've heard, it just ain't healthy. Oops. It's, well, I'll let you fill in that blank. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Orlene Kurla, and I am from your neighbor in the north, Santa Rosa. Our home was one of those who miraculously escaped the fire when all around us, 6 of our neighbors lost their homes, and I believe it is because we refused to have a smart meter. And I think there's a direct correlation between these fires. I had an electrical engineer who told me if this is the cause, when the power lines went down, it created a surge that went right into the smart meters. Since they have radiation in them anyway, they exploded. But an old analog meter, which we have, is grounded, had no problem whatsoever. So I truly believe that that is something that should be considered. I also want you to know that the entire nation is looking on Marin. You have the focus of so many people who are waking up to this issue, and I'm so impressed. I truly believe there are more people here that know what's going on than the entire nation. I recently wrote a book on this subject. It's called Whoa Nelly, 5G Dangers and Deception of Powerful New Wireless Technology. I entitled it that because I grew up on a nice ranch in Idaho. I rode horses with my best friend. Her horse that she let me borrow was called Maverick. When he was going home, he would never stop, no matter if you were saying whoa or not. And I'm afraid that's exactly what is happening. They are going full steam ahead with this without any testing, and we are the guinea pigs. But I had the opportunity to speak on this subject just a week and a half ago in St. Louis, Missouri, where 400 people were there. When I asked them who knew about 5G, no hands went up. And these were brilliant educators and people from all over the nation. Well, now they know, and they know that you're the people that are trying to fight this. And I hope that you will listen to all these wonderful voices that have been telling you the truth about this. Dr. Martin Paul's words are in here. In fact, so many, the research about the miscarriages is in here. And I'm just so impressed how all of you found this out when no one else did. So I'm impressed with the intelligence and the depth of research that are here in this room. And I'm impressed with you, Board of Supervisors, that you're willing to listen and take this all in. I also had the opportunity last September to lobby against this in Washington, D.C. As you know, it's not only the FCC that's trying to mandate this on us, but there was actually a federal law that was going to mandate it, and that would make it so no state could say no and no city could say no.
Your time is up.
But that's still stuck in the Commerce Committee, and hopefully we can keep it there. So I have handouts about what I said when I lobbied about that, and also I am donating my book to you.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Winches, and you may remember me as I'm current president of the Health Council of Marin, and I presented a letter in October to you from the council. But tonight I'm here to speak as a private citizen. I am a resident of Woodacre in unincorporated West Marin. I'm EMF injured. It's a little difficult to be here this long in this room. We, as I've told the story before, my husband and I lived in San Anselmo, and we were in a house where it was about a block from where they put in the first cell towers and Mira, and I became electromagnetic sensitive back in 1998. I'm part of the statistics of having miscarried 4 times, the last time at 20 weeks, no family. So we tried to mitigate the situation there. I became more ill. My husband, who's here tonight too, eventually became ill, so we had to sell our house. We moved, we went out to Woodacre, and we bought a home there. And we have been safe there, but it's becoming more difficult to live there as the Wi-Fi is going around us and as all the consumer products are put into homes, the mobile cell towers, etc. So if this 5G goes in there, I guess we'll be on the move again. So I'm here asking you people if you could put a moratorium on 5G in the residential communities in Marin and in unincorporated West Marin. I think fiber optics is a great way to go. Now, if you look at the 5G spectrum, it goes all the way up to 300 gigahertz. Included in that is radar. I've done a lot of reading on this. So being a pharmacist too, I've talked to a lot of people over time. One of my patients was a highway patrol officer who, this wasn't in Marin, this is the East Bay, but he actually passed away from testicular cancer. When he first got it, his wife came to me and she said, I won't say his name, but he got cancer. What sort do you think it is? Knowing I knew about it, and I said, testicular cancer, and she said, yes. And he passed away. My uncle was a radar operator for the Air Force. He died of a glioblastoma some years ago. And there is direct correlation there. I'm concerned too about the surveillance aspect of it, of this 5G technology, because the millimeter wave goes right through walls, and there is information in research. You can go to ResearchGate on it being used to actually see people inside buildings, and this is valuable for the law enforcement.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you. I've been waiting for this workshop for about a year, and so thank you for having it today. I agree with what everybody has said here today, and so I am not going to repeat that.
What's your name?
I am from unincorporated Greenbrae. My name is Anna Haar.
Thank you.
Before 28 years in Marin. Before that, I lived in San Anselmo, and we had to move because I found that I was having heart palpitations for 2 years and couldn't figure out why. And then we figured out, with some help, that underneath my house was running all the electric circuitry and current, the wires, for all the houses that were above me. There were 6 houses. And then the minute we moved, my heart palpitations had stopped. And that gave me a clue that I was sensitive to energy, electrical energy. And I always noticed with the cell phones that I could feel it running up my arm. And I know I'm not the only one. One of the other things I'd like to mention is that here we are, and if we remember where we are and who you are governing, you're governing Marin County and thousands of acres of open space land. And in this open space land is fires. And it has been mentioned before, but PG&E is responsible for 17 of the 21 fires caused by sparks from falling telephone poles. Redwood Fire, 9 people died. Cascade Fire in Yuba City, 4 people died. 2007 Malibu Canyon fire started because of overload of poles, collapsed and set off sparks. PG&E, yes, we've heard this is bankrupt, and so it happened because of the negligence of the fires and how they don't take care of their property. Our climate is changing. That is very obvious. Our weather is changing. We have more floods now. We have more drought. We have more dry vegetation. We have higher temperatures. Global warming is creating erratic behavior in our country and all over the world. And we can see that in Marin. And because we have so many trees, so much vegetation, so much beauty, and that is why we moved here. We need to protect our home. Our home is the land that is here. Besides our health, which is number one, but our health will be protected by protecting the ground. And if we have more pieces of equipment that we already have heard about that is dangerous to us, and we put them on poles where
Your
there
time is up.
Okay, where there are fires, then we are not paying attention. And I hope we do, because you have jurisdiction over the biggest area of Marin. So thank you for hearing all of us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Lynn Marie DeVinson. I'm from the city of Sonoma. And I'd like to applaud your efforts to alert your communities about this pending doom of the 5G cell towers. But I did also want to touch on the survey. You mentioned that there have been 215 responses, and the total population of Marin County is 260,955, so that's less than 0.001% weighing in. And I did want to suggest a correction, because your staff report on the website lists the 47% as somewhat concerned, but Manny's slideshow said the 47% were very concerned. There's a difference there. I hope you can correct that discrepancy. These cell towers are like the invisible icebergs that sank the Titanic. Who is watching out for the safety of the passengers? And Marin has the resources to prevent this disaster from happening. I also applaud the individual cities that have put urgent ordinances in place. The City Council of Sonoma did that last October, but that did not stop 3 so-called commercially zoned cell towers that have already gone before our Planning Commission for design review, a 5-hour meeting with misinformation from Verizon, and there are 10 towers planned for our little town. The City Council of Napa denied an urgent ordinance. There are now currently 2 cell towers that have been permitted for installation as so-called test pilots. There are 67 cell towers planned for downtown Napa, the historic district, and residential neighborhoods. We welcome and invite all of you incredibly informed Marin activists to help us. In the meetings I've attended, I've been told over and over about the 2 reasons to deny the permits: significant gap in coverage and aesthetics. The loss of property values and the scientifically proven health hazards are called non-issues, thanks to the FCC regulations. That's like the captain and crew of the Titanic being told that by the FCC that the icebergs aren't pointy. So if the ship crashes into them and everyone drowns, well, that's a non-issue. I respectfully request that you use all the power at your command to contact your state and federal representatives and tell them to immediately repeal the specific sections in the FCC regulations that prohibit the recognition of these egregious health hazards caused by these cell towers. And yes, they are ugly.
Thank you. Good evening.
All right, good evening, Board of Supervisors. Judy Schriebman. I live in the Los Ranchitos area of unincorporated Marin. I sent an email to you all earlier that referenced the Department of Interior letter stating that these EMF towers are in possible violation of the Migratory Bird Act because they interfere with wildlife's ability to migrate. That this could also be considered that there may be takings under the Endangered Species Act if animals are to be harmed by these towers. So I'd like to suggest perhaps that we need a full CEQA analysis of every cell phone tower that you're assuming to possibly be asking Verizon to put in, and they should perhaps do that, to make sure that no individual takings of our endangered species, which include spotted owls, clapper rail, salt marsh harvest mouse, northern spotted owl, any peregrine falcons that come through. The other thing which I want to bring to your attention, I'm sure you're probably aware, but it's almost for the reporter in the back of the room. I have been in a lot of public meetings, as you all have. I have never been in a 100% for one side. Public meeting in my entire life. I bet you have not either. Except for the two representatives, I've never, this is unprecedented. And I hope it gets covered properly in the IJ that there were two representatives of the industry and I don't know how many representatives of the community saying, please protect us. Health and safety, I have never seen health and safety overruled. That is the primary job of government. I have never, ever seen that thrown out the door in favor of anything else. Please continue on with what you're doing and protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Good evening.
Good evening, supervisors. Thank you for taking the time tonight. I know it's a long night. You had a long day before this meeting. It's hot and stuffy in here. Same is true for me and everyone else here. So just bear with me for a minute in these very few minutes I have that I very much appreciate. My name is Lonner Holden. I live in San Rafael. I come to these meetings and increasingly I don't bring notes because I don't know what I'm going to talk about when I start up in line. But by the time I get to the microphone, I'm available to what's present. So I have a question for each one of you and for everyone here in this room. In this moment, what are you grateful for? What do you, to yourself quietly, what are you grateful for? Because gratitude, I'm pretty sure at this point in my life, is the one custom that humans have sustained against all odds that unites us and connects us to the abundance that life is. So I got to thinking about this meeting a couple days ago, and I asked myself, I came up with a definition. And I started to think about the dynamics, what's going on in our country around this issue, and I asked myself, what's a definition of slavery? And the definition of slavery, as I see it today, is a socially dominating force that subjugates the population to its will by removing their personhood and their rights. What we're talking about here is freedom. We're talking about human freedom. And what is the primary precept and foundation and principle of this nation? It's freedom. Can you see the air around you? No, but you're free to breathe it. And you know that when it gets infected with something, you get sick. Can you see clear water? No, but you know the consequences of soiling the water. Can you see the electromagnetic field of the planet? No, but we know that there are consequences for messing with it. There is a greater force than all of those that unites all of them and unites all of us. And it's a great force that actually began about 14 billion years ago, and I call it ancestral energy. Without ancestral energy, there would be no life on planet Earth. And it is the one force that unifies all life. And being grateful for life unifies us with our ancestral energy. Everybody here has tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of generations of ancestors who are connected to nature, who are connected to reason, who are connected to previous generations. And my question is to you. Yes, I see that. My question is, I will leave with this. To what are you accountable to?
Thank you.
The ancestors and also for the future generations.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Oh, one last thing, postscript. Here's a definitive document on fiber optic, and there's a copy for all 6 of you.
Great. Thank you.
At no small cost to my less than affluent self, and a copy for all of you so that you can hold each other accountable for having read it.
Appreciate it. Good evening.
Good evening. Gratitude, I like that. My name is Connie Barker. I'm president of the Environmental Health Network of California. We've been doing support and advocacy around chemical and electrical sensitivity in this county since 1988. I am here on behalf of our many members here and elsewhere to tell you what you've already heard.
That's okay. Repeating is not that necessary.
It's a bigger problem that you know. It's going to get worse. There's more people affected than you know. But also, and this is the part where I'll tell you what I'm grateful for, to tell you that there's stuff you can do about it, that you have. This county has a long-standing commitment to the precautionary principle, and a lot of people in this room were at those meetings where that came to be. And one of the things I remember learning in those meetings is that the basic question you ask under that isn't whether something's safe or not, or toxic or not, and getting bogged down in any of those endless arguments. You ask a more simple question: is it necessary? 50 years ago, when they were telling us that, we needed more electricity, so we ought to be building, a nuclear power plant on an earthquake fault near here, people decided it wasn't necessary, and they said no. When Ecology House was being built, people were saying, well, does indoor air quality really make people sick? Can that really happen? We said, well, we don't think that all this toxic stuff you use to build buildings is necessary, and we built one without it. And now there's whole things called green building about doing that. Light brown apple moth spraying. Was that necessary? We said no. We helped stop it. Smart meters. Was that necessary? We said no, and we got an opt-out. This county and this area has a long and proud heritage of being a leader on these issues, of getting out in front and saying no when everybody else is saying yes, saying wait a minute. And just across the bridge in San Francisco, we got a wonderful example of what community civil disobedience can look like. 15 years ago, a certain guy who was a mayor and who is now a governor gave a lot of us who were in same-sex relationships a right we'd never had before. And the whole community stood with him. And a lot of people got married, and I was one of those people. So what I'm asking you here tonight is to listen to the no 5G and Marin people and look at their stuff, but also to listen to your conscience and your heart about people's rights and people who have been denied their rights, and about how you can do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Andy Perry. I live in Fairfax. Regarding gratitude, my peak for the evening was seeing every single one of your faces beaming and smiling when the question was asked. I think I'll use that one in the future. I wanted to share a few highlights of some studies that have not been mentioned tonight. I've come across these in the peer-reviewed literature on PubMed. While it's true that the FCC levels are the law of the land, that does not make them true, does not make them accurate, and certainly does not make them morally right. The following citations give a taste of how grossly inadequate they are. All of these studies have been done with signal strengths that are within what's allowed in the FCC rules. In 2017 dose response journal using common routers and mobile phones creates antibiotic resistance in microorganisms was the finding of that study. In 2018, bioelectromagnetics, students exposed to 1.7 gigahertz wireless showed significant increase in parasympathetic nerve activity, very highly elevated. 2015, Environmental Research and Public Health showed elevated HbA1c, which is the indicator for high glucose level. Another similar study, and risk of type 2 diabetes. There's another study on the same topic, exposure causing impaired insulin secretion, again, pointing to diabetes from this technology. And then the 2016 Journal of Chemical Neuroanatomy reviewed a lot of medical literature and found the same things you've been hearing tonight: sleep disturbance, headaches, concentration, attention issues, memory issues, dizziness, irritability, and so forth. Today, the thought arose out of thin air of an award that my late wife, Deb Huddsmith, got while she was sick. It was from Active Living Research. Translating Research into Policy was the name of the award. And what was so astounding about that award, of all the awards that she had, and she had many, was that she was being recognized for taking the science and turning it into policy. We have hordes of science. We have policy making every day, and oftentimes the twain do not meet. U.S. Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut and Congresswoman Eshoo from San Francisco have written a letter to the FCC about the safety standards, asking them to show us that 5G is safe. we would like to see this Board of Supervisors, either through our congressman or directly to the FCC, write a letter of support for that. And we also would love to see our 5G free recommendations that we given to you, and you have copies of those on your in front of you, to be utilized when we move forward with updating your ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Matt Landman. Please know that decisions made here in Marin will not just impact your constituents. Decisions made here will ripple across the state, the country, and the world. 5G technology has yet to be adequately studied, especially concerning impacts to human health, impacts to children, and those with electrosensitivities. Thousands of studies have concluded that non-ionizing radiation from 5G does in fact cause harm. Cumulative exposure of non-ionizing radiation and EMF fields was studied by the National Institute of Health in a study of utility workers who had an abnormal statistical significance of suicide rates. It was concluded that exposure to high levels of EMF fields caused depression and even suicide. In the random sample study, 10% of these workers committed suicide from them working near these cell towers. Cumulative exposure alters brain chemistry. Studies of EMF fields and RF radiation have shown blood-brain barrier leakage, birth defects, and cancer. Children are especially impacted, especially in the womb. The 1 millimeter size wave to be used to propagate the 5G system is already used in TSA body scanners at airports. Travelers are given the right to opt out of this scanning by the 1 millimeter wave technology. Please consider the creation of an independent body to assess the proximity and cumulative exposure health implications. Again, please consider the creation of an independent body to assess the proximity and cumulative exposure health implications. The independent, unbiased studies exist. People have already been drastically impacted by levels of non-ionizing radiation much lower than those of 5G technology. Not considering the research is immoral. Not considering this research is immoral. We all have the right to a safe living environment. We all have the right to a say in environmental decision making. Please hear our plea. I know you're here and you're listening, but please hear us. Please hear our plea, and please consider the implications of children conceived, born, and raised in this toxic environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for hanging out tonight. And thank you to everyone that's here. It's really amazing to see this kind of support. My name's Virginia Catoni. I live in unincorporated Novato. And I'm here to speak not only for myself, but also for my wife, who is electrically sensitive and can't be here. In reference to gratitude, I have a brain tumor, and I'm grateful because it's not cancerous. It's right here where I used to hold my cell phone all the time. My wife is a former teacher at Tamalpais High School. Her name is Lisa Miller. Some of you may have had your kids in her class. She was a science teacher and auto shop teacher. She had to leave her job and take an early retirement because of her electromagnetic sensitivity. Our life is very different now. We live mostly without electricity, of course, no Wi-Fi or wireless devices in our house. Lisa's been denied her rights, really. She can't work. She can't be here tonight. We can't go to a restaurant or a movie. And it's really sad. So I just wanted to ask you to be brave as we're facing this onslaught of electromagnetic pollution. As we're looking at the 5G question, please be brave, help protect us in Marin County, and stand up to the FCC. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Boggs. I'm from San Anselmo. I'm a 22-year resident of Marin County. You have a big job to do to carefully consider and manage the potential deployment of a new generation of wireless that crawls right into public right-of-ways and close to people's most sacred spaces and investments, their homes. Once these small cells roll in, there's no turning back. This untested technology, governed by corrupt and outdated FCC policy, will hang outside many of our bedroom windows, near many of our schools, near many of our workplaces, just about everywhere, adding an additional layer of toxin to our environment. It'll bathe our children, our elderly, our environment, taking away our choice to avoid exposure. The evidence that low-level, non-ionizing, non-thermal radiation is harmful to life is overwhelming. You even dedicate a section to this topic in your once fabulous 1998, 297-page telecom manifesto written during the age of 1G and 2G. To quote your own policy, increasingly, scientists and medical researchers have studied non-thermal effects of EMF exposure. Some studies have linked EMF exposure to changes in calcium ion influx across the blood-brain barrier, atypical hormone secretions, behavioral changes, and change in vision and eye tissue. It goes on to say, reasonable and responsible people continue to be concerned about this potential for adverse health effects due to long-term exposure of low-level EMFs. I guess that makes most of us in this room reasonable and responsible people. It goes on to say, the county regularly advises telecom service providers that it is prudent to site new transmitting facilities in areas that will avoid or minimize the long-term exposure to EMF in residential neighborhood and locations where people may be immunologically compromised, such as elementary school, preschools, and hospitals. This is wise and much of what we are asking you to do today. Distance is our friend. The farther away from these RF radiation emitting antennas, the better. It is imperative to establish safe distances from our homes, schools, and hospitals. Keep them high off the ground and keep large distance between antennas. Notify property owners and hold community meetings when applications are received. Require annual recertification, compliance bonds, liability insurance, and indemnification. Request specific technical data on your application. Make sure these facilities and their specific data will be tracked. MGSA's Marin map would be an excellent tool for this. Even with all of this, much will be sacrificed. The bottom line is there will be no version of this that is okay if local government and the people don't have the ultimate voice and power, and they can't say no. Please write a brutally protective policy and then declare a moratorium. I will leave you with San Anselmo's modification worksheet and the rigorous application checklist. San Anselmo has a dedicated wireless facility. It has a wireless webpage that includes a map of San Anselmo's wireless facilities, future and past meetings, and even educational links.
Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle Perro. Thank you for staying. Nice to see you all. And I must say that I never thought I'd be up here because I've spent the past year studying corruption, collusion, and activism as an integrative pediatrician. But whether it's we're talking tobacco, GMOs, and now 5G, I've had my little eyes widened over the years. I've been a pediatrician for almost 40 years. I think I qualify almost as an expert. I've been a Marin denizen for since '89, and I've been taking care of Marin County children for 30 years. I wrote a book, What's Making Our Children Sick, out last year, and I'm executive director of www.gmoscience.org. So I've put my time on the front line. What I want to say is, wow, what an amazing research team these guys are. I did all my homework tonight, so I thought I would talk about something else because they've done the science. I've submitted a letter to you yesterday. It's all in the books. It's written. We've got a Columbia guy. We have a Harvard gal. I gave you those references. I won't go there. I would like to tell you about the state of our children's health, very briefly what's happening in America, and then what's happening here in Marin County, because that's where I work and that's who I take care of. So 1 out of 2 children now has a chronic disease. 1 out of 8 white children has asthma. 1 out of 6 African-American children has asthma. 1 out of 3 children is obese. 1 out of 34 boys is on the autistic spectrum. 1 out of 58 kids. And from the time when I was a resident at Bellevue in New York, I'm a New Yorker, I speak quickly, that number was about 1 in 5,000. So these trends continue. I can talk about 2 out of 3 children have sleep disorders called dysomnias, which I treat regularly, and about 46% of teens have mental health issues. And this goes on. And that doesn't even call into question the disorders we're not diagnosing. So let's look at Marin County. How are our children faring here? I've been taking care of them. Well, I can tell you I take care of complex chronically ill children, and about 95% of them have evidence of food allergies, immune dysfunction, chronic inflammation, and other health disorders. Most children now in public schools in Marin, 1 out of 2, are requiring IEPs, and that's not normal. I can tell you we have a perfect storm right now. We have sick children, a toxic environment, and yet a medical system that's unprepared to care for them. So this is the groundwork. I can assure you that in my prescription, when I'm dealing with any chronic disease, there are 3 things I tell families to do, because this is simple. 1, eat organic. 2, get a water filter. And 3, shut your routers off. If you can't shut your router off, go onto a cable. The reason why I say that is the data is clear, is that Wi-Fi emissions, EMFs, lower immune function. And that's what I'm seeing. Kids are sick all the time. Kids don't even look healthy anymore, and I suggest if you're not aware of that, go look at a kid. If you don't know one, go borrow one. They're in the park. And go take a look at their dark circles in their eyes, coarse hair, musculoskeletal flabbiness, and not very healthy looking. So my question is, let's employ something called common sense. Not so common.
Time is up.
And I would implore this organization to help us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Laura Cheriton. I live in Mill Valley on Panoramic Highway. I live in a gulch. I started experiencing symptoms of headaches and disorientation, loss of sleep, and all the other things that have been described, or most of them. And I am not a hypochondriac. I was deeply concerned, so I started getting checked out. They found nothing. I was having these horrific headaches, like somebody was driving a spike through my head. And that started happening right after they put the smart meter on my home. I called PG&E because I was concerned that there was a relationship, and they assured me that they were hardly emitting at all. It was a tiny amount. Because we weren't getting any positives on the medical investigation, I decided to hire somebody to measure the EMFs, and found out that they were 100 times more than PG&E had told me. So, and many more times an hour. At my own expense and stigmatizing myself in the community in general since 2011, I've chosen not to talk about it publicly until now. Also, there's a bee colony on my property that was up in a eucalyptus tree, and when the smart meter was put on, it disappeared. I had the smart meter removed, and I was very fortunate because my next door neighbor was a California Public Utilities Commissioner. So I was able to start feeding him research on effects with children, cell phones, smart meters, as well as different wildlife, and particularly migratory wildlife. And I think all of you know that I'm deeply concerned about migratory salmon. So the fact that they could be affected was deeply concerning to me. So I'm just, sharing my experience with you. I was hopefully helpful in getting the smart meters removed because of the proximity of my neighbor and my relationship. And I appreciate everyone here in this room for sharing their experience. It's really meant a lot to me. And because I kind of felt isolated and alone and stigmatized. And also, thank you all for your research and your knowledge and incredible work that you've put into this. And I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. So on a closing note, I'm concerned about one of my close relatives now who is showing symptoms potentially of acoustic neuroma, and I would not have known that had I not read Harry Lehman's letter this afternoon. So thank you. I think we need to get a moratorium and ban 5G.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening.
Good afternoon, David Beach.
No, it's not afternoon.
It's an afternoon somewhere. Please, resident of unincorporated San Anselmo, became aware of this situation a year ago thanks to the documentary that was shown in San Rafael Presbyterian Church, Generation Zapped. I'm an engineer. I went out and bought myself, you can't see this EMF thing, so I went out and bought myself an EF meter. It's called an Acousticon 2, very inexpensive, $200. Because I wanted to know what was going on where I live. I live out Butterfield Road. I started at San Domenico at the school, and I measured the EMF radiation throughout Sleepy Hollow, past the firehouse, past the clubhouse, past the church. Green, none. Past the school, green, none. And then I came to Sir Francis Drake, about 100 feet from the Church of Nazarene, and the meter went off the charts, red. I said, well, gee whiz, this is really interesting information. I certainly don't want to live next to the Church of the Nazarene. And so then I shared that information with the Sleepy Hollow Fire Protection District. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to view a documentary on some testimony that Dr. Sharon Goldberg gave at the Michigan 5G small cell legislation hearing in October. And the headline in that presentation was the effect that radiation has on a fireman. And in effect, she said that there are cases out there where we've located 4G towers in the vicinity of our fire departments, and it's impacting their ability to respond. Well, I said, gee whiz, Church of the Nazarene. I remember driving out Bolinas at the Bolinas Mesa. We've got a 5G tower right there next to the firehouse and the public health building. Gee whiz, I drive by the Ross Valley Fire Department building. There's 5G strung all over that. So a couple of days ago, I took my meter out and I drove out to Bolinas, held it up to the, in the vicinity of the meter at the firehouse, pegged out at 6, maximum number. That's not good. Came back, did the same thing at the firehouse in Ross Valley, pegged out at 6. This afternoon, I sent all of you an email with the results of my study. I attached some tables that convert the measurements from this meter into more easily understood terms in terms of impact on public health. I'd like to close by suggesting that until we establish what in Marin is a safe level for our public service employees and firefighters, we have a moratorium on 5G. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I think I can do this in 1 minute.
Excellent.
My name is Janet Fitzgerald. I live in Fairfax, where I moved to a year and a half ago with my 16-year-old adopted daughter, who I adopted after ovarian cancer, because of the healthful lifestyle here in Marin. And I'm hoping that it stays that way. That's my personal note, and no more on the personal front. You've heard, it's really about you all tonight. You've heard now, because you've heard from us, it's your turn. I know you can't exactly respond, but I do want you to think about what you've heard, and has any citizen said, please bring it on? I've been to about 6 of these meetings in the towns, and I've never heard that. People are pleading, and so we are asking you to listen, and we look forward to your summary of tonight's meeting, and we hope to see the comments reflected in your position and your recommendations. That's my first point. So I basically agree with everybody who has every citizen who has spoken about don't put the FCC ahead of your people, and don't put their bullying ahead of facts and science. You've heard from doctors and engineers and very educated people and very concerned people tonight. So the ball is in your court. I have a couple of specific recommendations to redo the survey and ask for some community member input, and I'll volunteer as one of them. And then think about how you distribute it so you can increase that percentage rate up from 0.00, whatever it was. And then continue to advance your litigation, support the legislators who are fighting 5G, and keep us abreast. I'll help you with some ideas on that too. is to think about how we can have some real-time two-way communication with your community members. It might save everybody time and some frustration. And then lastly, yes, start the moratorium now until the science is all in and packaged and until the litigation is done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi, my name is Bonnie McMurray. I live in San Anselmo. I've been a resident for 10 years this June. Thank you all for hearing us all, and I want you to know I support all the 5G free people who've spoken tonight. I just want to mention a couple of things. One is I teach kids to read, and in the past 20 years almost that I've been doing this, I've seen an enormous amount of lack of concentration, lack of sleep, and just hyperactivity in general. I mean, it just gets worse and worse. And I go to their houses sometimes. I'm at their schools a lot. And I've noticed in their houses, they have, they're just wired to the hilt. And it's really exciting for them. But, they're not even on their devices necessarily. Their parents try to monitor that. But a lot of the parents don't even know that sleeping with Wi-Fi on is unfortunate, for the kids learning. And I guess why I want to talk is because I know that this is being publicized, and some people were asking on Nextdoor why anybody would need to come to this meeting. Why couldn't you just watch it from TV? And you can, and that's a great thing. But if you want to have a voice, then you have to come and you have to, present your information, and we have to show how we feel. So I'm hoping that people are out there listening, and I'm hoping that some people who aren't aware of this whole EMF situation will take note. On a personal note, myself, I had, when I moved into San Anselmo, a complex of about 16 condominiums. I thought smart meter controversy was just silly, and I just kind of thought, okay, Fairfax is like one of those crazy places, but that's all right, and you can opt out, and I thought, okay, that's good, but they didn't, get any, and I thought, okay, great for them, and I didn't worry about it. But in 2012, right after the smart meters went out, I started getting sick. I was sort of dissociating. I didn't feel like it was in my body. It was just very weird, and I was anxious, and then my daughter got sick also, and so I started doing research very deeply and realized, actually from a neighbor, that on my bedroom wall, where my daughter would sleep, with me because she was young, were 8 smart meters, and so that was kind of freaked me out. But I still kind of thought, oh, come on, it can't be the smart meters. There's got to be some sort of bug or something. And come to find out, there's another 8 smart meters right across the way. Now, the bank of smart meters on my bedroom wall are the gas meters, and the ones that are the electric meters are right across. And anyway, I'm the only person in the complex who has turned them off. So the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think even all of Marin is educated about the smart meters. I certainly wasn't.
Your time is up.
Okay, and I wish my neighbors would maybe think about taking their smart meters off or turn them off too, so that I could sleep at night. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I hesitate to ask whether there's anyone else from the public who wants to speak, but I am going to ask that, and if no one else stands up, this will be our last speaker.
Thank you, President Sears. Supervisors, my name is Bill Hammett. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of California. I manage a firm of 20. We're located up in the city of Sonoma. And a regular part of our 33-year practice is the calculation, the measurement, and the mitigation, where it's appropriate, of radio frequency exposure conditions. We do this work for carriers, for broadcasters, for landlords, for cities, for individuals. Our job as engineers is to assess what are the exposure conditions, how do they comply with the standards. I wanted to just make a couple of points of fact to help with the discussion. Someone made the suggestion that millimeter waves penetrate walls and might be used by police for. That's not really the case. Our remote controls for televisions use infrared, which is exactly a millimeter. And of course, if you put it behind the sofa, it doesn't work. So there is no penetration on that. The 5G system are using high frequencies, and they don't travel as well for that very reason we just talked about, like infrared. And as a consequence, they are placed more frequently because they travel a shorter distance, and they're lower power because they don't travel as far. So the systems that we're evaluating now for the different carriers are lower power than the traditional sites. And that, what that means is that they're lower power to start with. The inverse square law, basic principle of physics, if you go twice as far away, the power goes down by a factor of 4, 2 squared. If you go 10 times as far away, it goes down by 100, 10 squared. The power level of these emissions are dropping very rapidly. That's why they can be spaced fairly close apart, but the additive effect is not significant. These facilities, the ones that we studied, and we've done some measurements up in the rollout in Sacramento, will comply with the standards. That's the threshold condition. So people may not like the standards. As an engineer, my job is to assess compliance with the standard, and I want to reassure you that these facilities, as we've analyzed, will comply. The European Union adopted the ICNIRP standard, International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Its basic restriction is the same as the FCC's, 0.08 watts per kilogram. So it's not as though the FCC's standard is out of kilter with other standards around the world. Somebody made the suggestion that fiber would be the answer, but smartphones don't work on fiber. It's the last link has to be wireless, whether it's a mobile device or a handheld device. Somebody talked about the fire stations. I've taken measurements of the fire station in Bolinas. I know it definitely complies with all the standards, and it continues to be a very common siting location for wireless facilities, is at fire stations which already have a tower in their own facilities. Happy to answer any questions, but when
Thank you. Your
when
time is up.
facts.
No. Excuse me, gentlemen. No, may I ask you to sit down, please? And I think we have a person sneaking up, although I said that man would be the last speaker. All right, you are now the last. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Hillary. I'll try to be quick.
Thank you.
I came just out of interest. I don't have any sensitivity or stories or anything, but sitting here, I'm feeling a certain amount of compassion. And as somebody pointed out, you actually have to be in the room to speak. And I'd like to ask a possible favor or something like that in the future, if there's more meetings about this, that the people who are sensitive and have at their own risk come here, if they could be offered to speak first. It's an idea I'm proposing to you. And then the other thing, because of that sensitivity, is that if to the extent possible that people don't actually need to use their devices in this room, not you guys if you're taking notes, but everybody who's here, that we could have some digital minimalism as awareness. My husband uses wheelchairs, separate things, so I'm kind of aware of when people need an exception that's reasonable made, so I'm just throwing that out there as a future idea.
Thank you very much for those suggestions. So I'm going to bring the conversation back to our board and to staff, but I really want to acknowledge and thank all of you who are still here and who have spoken this evening. I think everyone was so articulate and so substantive and so engaged in this issue, and you did a fantastic job of arm waving. So that was just, really, really good, you guys, really good. It really made a big difference, so I appreciate that very much. So first I'm going to bring this back and ask staff. We heard a lot this evening. Are there issues that you would like to address before we may have additional questions?
Well, I think we've heard the request for either a full moratorium or a moratorium in residential areas, but I want Brian Case to just explain how that could or could not work for the board, and then there's a few other points.
Terrific.
We might just have some observations or comments to share with
That'd
the
be
board
very
as
helpful.
we dive into the substance.
Great. Super. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, if I may, through the president. On August 2nd of 2018, the FCC issued an order which preceded the subject order we've been focusing and talking about, and it was an order banning moratoria. That is the subject of litigation in the Ninth Circuit, so that ban is also being challenged, but the present state of the law is that is a validly enacted federal regulation, and local jurisdictions cannot pass either express moratoria or de facto moratoria because of that ruling.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Tom?
I might just respond to some of the other points that were raised by commenters. There was questions about the survey. You know, we welcome public participation. It's good to see the amount of engagement tonight, but we're using the Open Marin tool as another vehicle for the public to weigh in. This is not a fancy survey. This was not, you know, consultant generated. This was just staff's attempt at the first cut at getting engagement, and this was vetted with the board subcommittee. We were tiptoeing into another vehicle for folks who, you know, may not be able to attend evening meetings to provide input. And certainly the survey results were not intended to be reflective of the broader, you know, Marin resident population. What we would like is to provide better and more opportunities for public input into the matter, whether you're supportive of 5G or you're not. It's just a, you know, public engagement tool. Shot clock. I'll knock off some of these relatively easy ones. You know, we have a set of proposed amendments to our zoning code that's winding its way to the Board of Supervisors. The Planning Commission has already reviewed those, and I believe those are on track to be considered by the board in early March. On the limitations on fees that can be charged, you know, I think our council will support that our cost recovery based fee can be charged, and that we would not necessarily have to concede to the limitations set by the FCC order. Those are, you know, kind of where we stand. However, there's a few things, you know, we do want to discuss with the board and get, you know, kind of some direction on. This limitation, moratorium in residential areas, if you will, separation standards, aesthetics, you know, what, I think we've heard testimony about the FCC's order on limits on aesthetic reviews taking effect in April, and that may be why a number of jurisdictions have addressed that to kind of preempt that before the mid-April kind of clock starts. So we would like to kind of discuss, you know, the extent the board wants us to kind of get into aesthetic regulations given the FCC's order about, you know, objective standards. That's a tough nut to crack. And I think there are a number of suggestions for fiber optic, and I think the second to last speaker, Mr. Hammond, kind of does point out one of the limitations of that, which is you don't get service to a mobile device with fiber. That's great if you're serving, you know, structures and, you know, so.
I have service without 5G.
Okay, so no comments from the public at this point. Thank you. Tom, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Anything else from staff? Any responses to testimony you heard? Okay.
One more legal matter. There were a number of public comments about requiring indemnification from the applicants. The Marin County existing telecommunications facility plan does require a very broad indemnification. It's part of the process in reviewing an application has the applicant agreed to defend, indemnify, hold harmless the county from any claims, actions, or proceedings. So that is part of our existing plan.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, you may.
So there was several speakers spoke to a recommendation by one of the firms that's actually representing, not the one we chose on our BBK, on not craft an ordinance or modify our ordinance to make it too responsive to the current FCC ruling in case some element of that fails or it gets turned around at a certain point. I'm not asking the question very well, but
the question, but you're tired.
I'm tired. I'm just wondering if that seems like it, because it seems like a legal question actually. Does that make sense, and or if we amend our current policy to be responsive to what the FCC's, the new order, and then that order somehow is changed, we can always modify back or not? I mean,
Yeah, well, you know, I wouldn't recommend having any unlawful code on the books at any point. That said, my opinion is that the existing plan is defensible despite the order. The inquiry into whether or not we have objective standards, I think our plan passes that test and we can deploy it in the interim. If your board wishes to adopt something to make changes as one of the options recommended by staff on any of these different issues, that could happen at a later date than the effective date of the aesthetic regulations in March.
Great, thank you and I'd like to follow up on that, Brian, because one of the things that I was going to say later, but I think it fits in now. What if we assume that the litigation is successful and really consider appropriate amendments to the existing plan with that in mind? Was that, I like the one. Thank you. So would that be a step that, based on what you just said, if the existing plan is defensible, you would suggest that we wait and see if the litigation is in fact defensible, is in fact successful? Or I personally think this could be a good time to think through what would modifications to the plan look like, assuming it is successful, and perhaps that means no change. I'm just sort of throwing that out there. Do you have any initial reaction?
We ultimately will get a ruling from the Ninth Circuit, and that ruling will help inform what the contours are on some of these open questions, whether it's a win or a loss. And I think at that point, the specifics could be nailed down in terms of what would be the strongest county ordinance in terms of using the existing tools to make sure we're protecting against aesthetic threats and other proper subjects of regulation. That would probably be the best time, and that won't be until early 2020. But I think that the plan for success in the litigation could certainly happen in parallel with planning for unsuccessful endeavors in the litigation. And perhaps staff would like to discuss the timeline for bringing something back to your board.
I appreciate it. I mean, we do have the benefit, and not every jurisdiction has an existing plan, and we do have the benefit of having an existing plan. And if you do believe it's defensible, I think that maybe gives us some alternative routes to think about. Tom, I see you're thinking rapidly. I can see those wheels turning.
I think that's a viable strategy. However, assuming the FCC order is struck down, we do need to tighten up our regulations because this is fundamentally different than the 4G, 3G, where you have taller antennas.
Right.
This distributed network. Right. So it would be helpful for us to come up with standards. And a number of speakers and the testimony have included examples of how other jurisdictions like Burlington. Right. And I think we can probably look at stealing and copying some of the more effective tools to ensure that we have the greatest leverage in dealing with these type of systems.
Great.
But I do think we do need to amend our requirements because this is quite different than the previous generations that where our plan has held up pretty well.
Good point.
Yeah, but we may not need to immediately, react right now. That is a viable option, I think.
Great, thank you. Supervisor Arnold, I think you had a question.
I do, thank you. If we wanted to get more information on fiber optics, who would bring that to us?
Well,
IST.
Well, I think we have recent experience of fiber optics being extended to, I think, Nicasio, West Marin, so maybe good to talk to the carrier or the agency that kind of had involvement in that.
There's a couple providers that would come and make a presentation if we wanted.
Is that?
I would like to see it.
Okay.
Right, were there,
Just as a follow-up to what you're talking about, Tom, I think that we do have the option of maybe developing two different change policies, but I think in the short term, we should address a couple things, and I think distance to schools and residents should be added into the current policy. I think that's important, and that one protection is important, is an immediate need, and it also puts our carriers on notice that we're pretty sincere about that, and we want to use that as a guideline to starting right now. So, Brian, you could comment on that. I think other cities have added that in, and there's some good samples out there, so we just need to figure out which one fits Marin the best.
Yeah, I think something like that could be reconciled with the prohibition on moratoria, because it wouldn't be a moratoria. It would be a very specific, reasoned regulation.
Great. So, and on the legal side, Brian, Judy Schreibman, one of our speakers, mentioned the Migratory Bird Act and the Endangered Species Act, and whether it would be appropriate to require full CEQA review. I'm not necessarily going to put you on the spot and ask you to answer that question right now, but I think it would be helpful to look at that, unless you do have comments right at the moment.
Well, yeah, I will refrain from commenting on that, except that there are federal FCC orders that relate to NEPA and environmental review. And like this order, they are very industry-friendly in streamlining applications and avoiding environmental review.
Okay, thank you. Questions from?
Couple comments.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight and offering your viewpoints. Really helpful. And I imagine we'll have an ongoing discussion. So big picture for me, we need to protect the public to the greatest extent possible. So I would concur with my colleagues right now. That should include, as we continue to evaluate what we can do, we should move immediately on minimum distance requirement from residential zones. That could be up to, it sounds like there's a range of 500 to 1,500 feet that have been implemented elsewhere. That's where the discussion, prohibiting installations within a minimum distance of areas that include child care centers, medical facilities, schools, distance in between installations. Like to see any and all action necessary for fire hazard reduction. That featured prominently in a lot of the comments we heard. One other legal issue that it looks like is somewhat unclear is our ability to mandate coverage analyses and alternatives. Continuing to press on that. Toward that public protection. Intrigued by Burlington, Vermont. I noted they have an annual recertification process, among other things. And looking at limiting placement in other zoning districts to the greatest degree possible.
I think I concur with all those, with all.
Can I have one more thing? And I think you're going to raise it. I'm going to let you raise it, but I'll tee it up. HR 530, City of Santa.
I'm going to address that.
All right, City of Santa Fe.
I'm holding that. I'm holding that.
I don't want to steal everything.
No, I'm holding that. Yeah.
I noticed that City of Santa Fe.
No, literally, I'm holding that letter. We're coming back to it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I'm on it. And same thing for 530 if you're going there.
Right, well, so
We've sent a letter today. I'm going to address that at the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
See, we don't coordinate.
It's the power of the presidency and being able to sign letters.
So I concur with Supervisor Connolly's recommendations coming at you. I'm going to kind of keep it at high level. I think that Brian, you just spoke this a little earlier. I do think we should be pursuing sort of parallel paths forward, whether it's it's preparing for, sort of alternative situations with regards to the litigation and the results of that. But then also, as Damon just referenced, and you're going to get into the detail, I think we should be pursuing the political legislative path with our folks up in DC and also just in terms of the coalitions that are being built. I also think that we should be generally looking at our ordinance and strengthen it regardless, bringing it more up to date. And I don't have the document in front of me, but one of the speakers referenced some of the language that is in the policy that does speak sort of more editorially around health concerns. I think that was can't remember who was Kathleen Boggs, and I'm just wondering, given that there's given that there is more science, there's new technology, if we want to sort of reference and or cite some of the newer thinking around health concerns with regards to the technology that we're looking at right now, just sort of making the whole policy more current, generally, even in the editorial comments. And other than that, I also want to thank everyone who came tonight to speak. And it is a remarkable cross-section of folks, actually, on this issue, which is sort of unique for one of our meetings. And I appreciate everyone being polite and respectful. And there are people that are concerned out in the community about having cell coverage and having actually telecommunications capacity where they may not have it now. And there's a possibility that 5G is an answer for them. I don't know all that well enough, but people can have concerns. We're all learning. So I think we have to be respectful of all points of view here. But I think you all were extremely articulate, and it's good to see so many people caring about an issue and getting other people involved in the discussion. Thank you. Comment?
Yes. Thank you all for coming and for being so thoughtful and giving such a good amount and different recommendations on what you have studied and sharing with us. There's one thing that I would hope you did a great job with your hand raising. I'm wondering if we took the opportunity to stand up a few minutes while you were talking, would you be insulted? Because we've been sitting for 3.5 hours. When I'm president, I'm going to let everybody stand up. No, in looking, you provided a lot of information to us through emails and through mail. And in looking at the material that you have sent on the harmful effects of 5G, and especially the information from Mr. Lehman, from Ms. Anthus, and from the Burlington study, that cellular radiation is a disaster, and I'm convinced of that. It's a disaster for humans, for trees, for insects, and for critters. And I support the staff's recommendation, which would, and I also, the recommendations of limiting residential areas, ridge and upland greenbelt areas, and stealth design. And I also support adding the objective standards for us to consider. Co-location, you know what they are, design standards, etc. So I think that's where we can go next. And I would also like to learn a little bit more about fiber optics. I know SMART has fiber optics under the track, and you can get anything on their train, on your email. So that really is what I'm thinking, and I'm happy to answer any questions the staff might have. No? Okay.
I think we would want to be able to continue to work with the board subcommittee as we dive deeper into some of these details, and then come back and report to the board at a publicly noticed meeting. And I will also ask interested parties to subscribe to our webpage that we're building around this topic as we get more information, and certainly the staff reports, comments and stuff, we'll try our best to make that available.
Super.
Yeah.
Terrific. Supervisor Rodoni, did you have any additional
Well,
comment?
I just wanted to say that I concur with my colleagues, all the recommendations that came forth. I want to thank everyone for attending. You're well behaved, so I'm going to go like this, all of you. You know, just because the federal government tells us that the health doesn't matter, doesn't mean we ignore it locally, and we don't ignore it from our citizens' point of view. I do want to mention that I do think that hardwire fiber is a safer option, but there are some issues with that too. It's not just a total solution. Main issues being is that the providers have a different business plan. And so I encourage you to ask for fiber when you talk to your providers and keep demanding it, and maybe we can change their thinking. The other thing I just wanted to comment is to continue the litigation fight with the FCC. It's really important. I think everything else was covered though, so thank you all.
Super. Thank you. So I was particularly struck by a couple of comments. The one being the energy consumption of 5G, and I really appreciated that input because with all the information that everyone sent to us, that was not something that, at least for me, had risen to my attention, and that's incredibly important. And obviously, the health and wellness of the community and all of the creatures that live in it needs to be our primary focus. The Internet of Things can never surpass in importance, from my perspective, the importance of the health and wellness of our community. And so I support the various comments by my colleagues of ways we should go forward. And I do want to, I will read for you, we have a legislative plan that allows us to act quickly, to send out letters on particular topics that are covered by our ledge plan. And using that, we sent today a letter that my colleagues have not seen. I'm going to read it for everybody. And this was a letter to Jared Huffman about H.R. 530. It says, Dear Congressman Huffman, on behalf of the Marin County Board of Supervisors, I write to respectfully request your leadership in co-sponsoring the Accelerating Wireless Broadband Development by Empowering Local Communities Act Bill, H.R. 530, introduced by Representative Anna Eshoo on January 14, 2019. H.R. 530 would return local government's ability to balance competing interests for the use of the public rights-of-way by overturning actions of the Federal Communications Commission in August and September of 2017. We believe that the Commission has significantly overstepped their authority. We actively support the Commission's goal of ensuring affordable broadband access for every American. The Commission's actions denying local government's ability to manage the public rights-of-way, however, do not achieve that objective. Local government is in the best position to effectively and equitably balance varied factors such as public safety, utility services, environmental concerns, and maintenance costs and responsibilities. Your co-sponsorship of H.R. 530 would be extremely beneficial to help ensure that local governments have the necessary tools to manage local public assets in a manner that weighs competing interests while encouraging responsible deployment of wireless broadband facilities. Thank you for your leadership and consideration of this request. I would suggest that we augment that letter with some of the content from the very good letter that was sent by the city of San Rafael in late December that really focuses on requesting from this letter to the FCC, requesting that they provide 5G safety determination and relevant health agencies provide input. So I would like that we also draft an additional letter that addresses the safety and health concern issues and makes that request to the FCC. And I think that might be the sum total of all that we have left after a very long day today. And so I appreciate everybody's time and attention and input. And there will be more to this conversation with your assistance. Good evening. Thank you.